item is online and they're gonna want to speak.
Point change. Okay, that's fine. I haven't seen her.
I'll be honest, I haven't been around too much lately on that, so. I'll talk to Greg. Like I said, that's one he's working on.
Hey, Wendy. Do you know if Andrew's online? We can start without, but
Were you guys on the 89 job? I'm just curious.
I know. Actually, I'd like it that way.
I'm just curious how it all
I have to
turned
look
out.
at the front, see where I'm sitting.
I mean, who the, you know,
Not all of it's
did Kevin Horn bring you on? I'm assuming. Yeah, before we were there. Yeah.
That's okay.
Well, then, absolutely. That was the case.
depending on the item.
We want people to honor their commitments to us.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't talk about changing the meeting to Wednesday.
No, we don't.
All right.
Stuck me in the corner. I like it.
I like that spot.
Is Andrea on? No? Okay. I'm gonna start.
I wonder if Andrew's gonna make it.
I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, August 5th, 2021. We'll start off with item 2.1, which is the Pledge of Allegiance, which Ryan Button has offered to lead us in that, if he wants to come up to the mic.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ryan. We are missing some of the Planning Commission tonight, but we do have a quorum enough to proceed. I will turn to the Planning Commission to see if there's any conflicts of interest with any of the items tonight. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item 2.4, which is an approval of minutes for the May 20th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. And we'll look for the Planning Commission to make a motion on that.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from
May 20th.
May 20th, 2021.
I'll second that.
Motion by Lauren, a second by Andy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to items, administrative items. Trying to think if we have any on for public hearing. We do have some items on for public hearing, but it's actually the legislative item at 4.1. So when we get to that, that is on for a public hearing today. So item 3.1, which is a request for approval for preliminary plot to individually plot an existing fourplex building. And we'll turn to city staff for additional details.
Good evening. So the first item on the agenda is a request for subdivision plat amendment to subdivide lot 0L31 of the Overlook Rosecrest Phase 2. The applicant's Brandon Anderson. The site's located at 14,423 East Ferndale Way. Let's see, what the applicant's requesting to do is subdivide an existing single lot into 4 individual lots with the intent to sell each one of these townhomes off individually. Let's see, this is the existing plat, just showing that it's one lot, it's 0.08 acres. Again, his intention is to subdivide those into 4 correlating parcels to meet the footprint of each one of those townhomes. This request is not changing the footprint of the building, requiring any setback modifications, et cetera. It did go to DRC. There was no comments or concerns from other departments. And therefore, staff does recommend approval of this request. I believe Brandon's here. If you have any questions for the applicant.
All right, thank you. We'll let the applicant come up and just if there's any additional information. And please just state your name.
Brandon Anderson.
Do you have any additional information on this that you want to share? You did a good job. Awesome. Awesome. Are there any questions for the applicant from the Planning Commission? Nope. Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll let you have a seat. I'll turn to the Planning Commission for additional discussion or a motion to be made. And I guess the only question I had is, based on the exterior, I assume that's still part of an HOA and maintenance purposes?
Yeah, it's all part of the common space still.
Okay, that was the only question I had. All right,
I think we've seen this a lot lately, so I'm ready to make a motion. Make a motion to approve item 3.1, approval of preliminary plat to individually plat an existing fourplex.
I'll second it.
a motion by Lauren, a second by Forrest. We'll call for a vote. Andy?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
And Jackson?
Yes.
And is Andrea on or no? All right, then that is approved. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item 3.2, which is a request for approval for a preliminary plot to adjust the property lot line at 4488 West Birkdale Drive. And we'll turn to city staff on that item.
This next item here again is another subdivision plat amendment. This is to adjust a lot line. The applicant is Fieldstone. I think Clark Garf is actually representing Fieldstone tonight. This property is located on it's the east end of the valley there, off of Juniper Crest Road. The two lots here, the reasoning behind this request is due to the home that was built on lot 77 was built 2 feet wider than what was on plan. Therefore, that home on lot 77 is encroaching into the side yard setback by 2 feet. This application actually came to you guys in September 2020, and the applicant was actually asking for a reduction in that side yard setback. Commission denied the request due to safety concerns. The applicant has resubmitted asking for a lot line adjustment. They've contracted with the homeowners the property owners of lot 76 to purchase 2 feet of their property there along their west lot line. And their intent is to deed that to lot 77 with the adjustment of the lot line moving to the east 2 feet, which would give both lot 77 5 feet for the side yard setback and lot 76 at this time, they actually have 7 feet, so they would still maintain that 5-foot setback minimum. This is the existing plat. This is the proposal of the lot line adjustment here. Again, they're just showing that lot line being moved 2 feet to the east, sorry. Another concern we had, it did go to engineering. Engineering did have some concerns regarding any overhangs protruding into that 5-yard setback, any cantilevers, They asked that the applicant noted that on the plat, just restricting any overhangs in that 5-yard setback. And we also recommended that they move the fence line to correlate with the new lot line adjustment. This is the updated plat that notes that no cantilevers can be constructed on those within those setbacks.
Is this the one that had the window well?
Yeah, and that was one of your concerns as well, is the window wells with that 3-foot setback. Given the 5 feet, it does give them an additional 2 feet of space. I'm not exactly sure how far out the window wells protrude, probably 2.5, maybe 3 feet maybe.
So you probably have 2.5 feet, somewhere in there.
Yeah, so this will give them enough pedestrian access through there so they're not encumbered by the window wells. Our building official went out and did an inspection of the actual lot to make sure that the portions of the buildings adjacent to those side yards do meet fire code requirements. So that was something I was taking care of as well.
And I'm sorry, did you say the fence line will be moved to alleviate any ambiguities between boundary and?
Exactly, yeah. That's
Possession.
a recommendation we made and the applicant agreed upon that recommendation. And we did still leave that as a condition of approval.
All right, any other questions for staff? Then if the applicant's present, if you want to come up, just state your name and any additional information that you may want to share on the item.
I'm Clark Graff.
Thank you. I'm Dan Danzy, and I represent Fieldstone Homes. Clark works for Fieldstone Homes. And in between, as was mentioned by the staff, in between last time we were here and this time, we've really tried to address the concerns that the Planning Commission had, particularly that safety concern of having the fence up against the window well. And so the way that we've done that is to split the difference. And assuming that we get approval tonight, we will be able to move that fence over the 2 feet so that each side will have 5 feet on their side of the fence. And it'll be typical of the setbacks and of the side yards of the other homes in the neighborhood, many of which have that 5-foot side yard. In between, this went to the DRC just a few weeks ago, and they recommended some fire rating, and I think as was mentioned, we went out and worked with the adjacent homeowner to actually do that additional fire rating here within the last week or so. And so now both sides of the property are fire rated on that side of the building that would abut the new boundary. So with that, we would echo staff's request for an approval, and happy to entertain any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Yes, on the original subdivision plat, the side yards typically are outlined with public utility easements. Now that you're moving the boundary line, that doesn't always equate to moving the PUE. Are there any utilities that are going to be interfered with when you relocate the fence or create any issues along those lines?
No, there are no utilities in either side.
Is there an easement along that then, like he was asking?
There is an easement.
There's still an easement, but just no utilities within it. Okay.
So now, the easement is usually split on the property line, 5 feet either way. I don't know the easement widths, but now it's going to be uneven. Chase, I'm not sure what the proper thing to do here is.
The plat will likely capture that. So when they record the plat.
amended plat.
We'll move the,
And
we'll
the
shift the
Okay.
easements.
Yeah.
I think that's what they show on their subdivision plat as well.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Nope, but I like the resolution from what you had from last year. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
no, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
We'll look at Planning Commission for more discussion or a motion to be made at this time.
I don't have any discussion. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve item 3.2, preliminary plat to adjust property lot line as outlined with staff's 3 recommendations.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Andy, a second by Jackson. We'll call for a vote. Jackson?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll move on to item 3.3, which is a conditional use approval for monument sign for the Emerson Apartments. And just to note, the applicant is online, so we will address him online in a second when we get there. City staff?
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that one. Okay, maybe just do the other one then. I apologize, I don't know why there's 2 of them. Alrighty. Okay. So is it not on there? Okay. I apologize. My computer locked on me, so it must still be open on there. All right. So this item is a proposed monument sign at the Emerson Apartments, which is located at 5605 West on Roe Deer Lane. So located near the Herriman High School, right there with the yellow square, kind of give you an idea of where it's at. The applicant is proposing to put this sign facing that street, 11800 South, near the entrance of those apartments. And the next slide, it kind of gives you a closer look. It meets that 18-foot setback. It's not in the clear vision zone, so we have no issues there. You can see the sign measurements. I also have it here in feet because that might be a little bit easier to understand. Height is 57 inches, which is about 4.75 feet tall. And the length is 126 inches, which is about 10.5 feet tall. The width is 16 inches, which is about 1.3 feet. And then the square footage would be a little less than 50 square feet. So all those measurements meet code. So there are no issues there. As you know, with conditional use, there are other factors that both staff and the commission look into to make sure it is up to code and to make sure it, the economic impact or smells or whatever impacts those may have on the surrounding area. And as staff, as we looked through these issues, most of them don't apply to a sign. But there were a couple, such as harmony with the surrounding development and the aesthetic impact, that we were a little concerned about with the design. So if you'll go down to the next one. So as you can see, the proposed sign is more of a modern look and has gray and black colors. And the existing building has more of a traditional look with browns and blues and tans. So the design doesn't really match that of the existing building, which kind of affects the aesthetic impact and the harmony with the existing area. And so the next picture is kind of a more clear image of that apartment building to get a better idea of how it looks. So with these findings, staff is recommending denial of this monument sign because of the difference in styles and colors. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And as you mentioned, the applicant is online as well.
Any questions for staff?
Maybe, what do you recommend? What would you recommend they change? Just the material of the sign then? Or the colors, or both?
I don't know if I have a exact suggestion, but yeah, something to match more of the building, either in color or style, so that it works with it.
Maybe the bottom of the sign matching the brick that's there in the building as well, not something so
I don't think
contrasting.
it's the black, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the black, but the brick right there, maybe you have the brick and then
Match
the
that
black
red brick.
lettering on it,
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
not such a bad situation.
Thanks, Delaney.
That's my thought.
Thank you. Is the applicant online? If you want to just state your name and maybe share any additional information.
Yeah, Blake Anderson, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. So, as you know, the monument sign in your city is a conditional use. The city has allowed monument signs to go through if you meet X, Y, and Z. Those are mostly if you've got a brick or stone column and a brick or stone base. You've allowed us to apply for an application to propose something that's a little bit different. I'm actually just reviewing this report for the first time. So forgive me, I'm trying to catch up to speed, but in my conversations with planning, I too kind of asked the same questions that you guys asked because it's preferable for us to design to code rather than to avoid running in circles, trying to propose something that is not wanted or desired. My question was, well, what is it that you guys want to see different? And I haven't been given an answer other than maybe doing brick, which kind of negates the whole purpose of applying for this application. That being said, if you take a look at the surrounding area, at the entrance, both to the right and left of the drive, you've got landscaping that's xeriscape. It's all neutral colors. The entrance to the drive has an island that also has that same landscaping. As you continue on into the community, you've got roundabout, and everything surrounding the leasing office is all that same earth tone, grays, rocks, xeriscaping type landscaping. You can actually see that there in the images that have been supplied. The ownership is trying to kind of update an aging building. So you can kind of see where we've placed our sign. You've kind of got that military green, very dark brown. They've now updated those colors to more modern, less traditional colors to keep an aging, dating building more current. And I think that's kind of what the purpose of this monument sign is here. I think the concrete fits very naturally with the surrounding landscapes as you drive in and out of the community. I would be open to maybe changing the colors of the letters to maybe match more of the building colors so that that looks more cohesive. But I just don't see how having a brick base is going to make that more cohesive. Otherwise, it just kind of negates the whole process of proposing something outside of what the standard, what the planning department allows. So that's kind of what we're here to discuss.
Thank you, Blake, for your comments. And I want to just say a little something because whenever we have these type of monument signs, they always do come back, is to enable different designs that are a little bit different things like that. But in saying that, and I think a good example is our accessory building requirements. We want them to match and be cohesive with its surroundings. The fronts are required to look like they go with the development and to go with what's actually located there. And I can see, I run by this area quite a bit actually, and I'm pretty familiar with it. And I can see that it almost looks like it's not tied to your development at all. And so I can see where the staff is coming from with the black and the grays, and then you look back and you have a reds and bricks and different colors. It very much so does not look like it goes with that development. It almost looks like there may be something else within this neighborhood that it's tied to. And so I can understand where staff is coming from, at least from my perspective. And I guess I'll ask the planning commission or staff or anyone else, is there any questions directed towards the applicant?
Blake, can I ask, are you, because if you look at this one picture I'm looking at here with the blues and the, that one there, I don't know if you can see that, Blake, but is this, your intent is to paint more of the buildings like this?
All of the buildings have been updated to those colors. So none of the green, none of the dark brown, none of that. I mean, if there's dark brown, it's very, very little. They've tried to get away from that and modernize that. So what you're looking at is current. And all of the buildings, the clubhouse, garages have been painted what you're seeing right there on that screen.
Commissioners.
Yes.
So there was a change in state law. There's a change in state law recently that required cities to adopt objective standards with regard to conditional use permits that was signed into law in March. This application was made after that new law went into effect. So I'm not saying you should approve or deny tonight. What I am saying is if you are going to deny, it needs to be upon a finding that this is not an objective standard, that they're not able to meet the objective standards established by the city. And it would be my legal counsel to you that the congruency with adjacent development doesn't fit that mold of objectivity. It's a subjective standard. So if you do deny, it has to be based upon an objective finding that it does not comply with the objective standard
Long
of the
words
city.
again.
Essentially, what I'm saying is we have not updated our city code to comply with that new state law yet, to capture that.
And personally, I mean, if this is the building here we're looking at, I don't have a problem with it, personally. If this is what it looks like here, then I don't have a problem with it anyways, so.
And I think there's some discretion in how you look at this, but when I looked at the sign with the background, it just doesn't look like it's tied to the development. And so, I mean, if that's something that they're okay with, then as a developer, then it's not something normal, but I don't think it looks like it goes with it at all. And so.
But we can't, you're saying based on new code, we can't.
That's subjectivity, right? That's object. So if you'll go back, Mitch, to the slide that talked about the standards for approval or consideration, keep going back up.
Because none of the materials, none of the style, none of it is cohesive with what they have.
I think that would fall under harmony with surrounding development.
Yeah.
So if we were to say it is not in harmony with surrounding development, then that would be basis for denial.
Yeah.
And now I say that knowing that, just as a quick.
Subjective.
No, not even that it's subjective, saying that I actually like the sign in and of itself. And we're actually doing a board form sign in front of my building right now. So my own office, we like this style. But I think when you look at it as far as harmony with surrounding development, it doesn't. So.
And I think that's where I look at it.
So would it help if I just read the statute?
That would
It's pretty
be great.
clear, pretty simple
Yeah,
to
that'd
understand.
be great.
A city may adopt a land use ordinance that includes conditional uses and provisions for conditional uses that require compliance with objective standards set forth in an applicable ordinance.
Clear it up for me, sorry.
Did it not clear?
Is that subjective there?
Clear as
We're
mud.
going to apply a subjective interpretation to that object.
Did a lawyer write that one?
Absolutely, most definitely.
Yeah.
Legislative council wrote that one.
Yeah, I mean, at least from my perspective, I'm looking at it from, is it tied to the actual development? And that's hard for me to say yes. So, and most developers would like their signs that look like they're actually tied to what they own. And at least with the materials and the colors and the look, it doesn't look like that to me.
I think it looks better if that background building, the picture with the monument sign in the background building, if that one's been repainted.
Gray?
Shades of blues
And gray.
You get someone to
Had some grays
Photoshop
in
that
it.
real quick.
Yeah.
That's what's throwing me off, is that picture doesn't look good, but is that a current picture? Because that, to me, this is the current picture.
And maybe we ask the actual applicant, can
what
you
he
see
said.
the,
He said they've all been painted.
can you see the picture with the actual sign, and in the background it has the brick, and then it does have a green there, definitely has a green tan look to it. Is that the actual building behind where the sign will be?
So that is the building. But again, you're looking at old colors.
So
I
it's
think
now the blue
two
colors and
pages
everything
down. Yeah, the tan, the blues, that's current. All of the buildings are now that color.
Well, and to your point about not meeting, I mean, you don't have any other board form concrete as your base. And so aesthetically, you would want to follow the kind of brick base, because you're not painting the brick, I assume.
No.
Okay. But along the same lines, and Chase, maybe you can help me on this, according to the new standard, aesthetic is subjective. So anything aesthetic is not objective.
So I'm going to make you keep going back and forth here, Mitch. If you'll go back up.
Is material objective or subjective?
Well, it's
Let's just focus on this. Harmony with surrounding development, in my legal opinion, is a subjective condition.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about material? To match material, is that objective or subjective?
Yes, but we don't have that adopted as a standard.
That's
Okay.
not a standard.
Yeah, that's not here.
Either
That's
way,
not
we don't
listed
have it
here.
adopted.
Well,
as a
we have
standard.
aesthetic impact, which
Aesthetic
may be
impact.
closer to the
Aesthetic, I
material.
also would argue is
That's subjective.
is a subjective.
Right.
I mean, it's too bad that we don't have the picture with the current colors
Yeah.
with it, with the sign, because I think he's right. If you go back and look at the context of it, with the rocks and everything that's being placed in, right? And then with this color, I personally don't have a problem with it.
And I think what I'm about to say goes beyond what we're talking about here today, but I think these items that we're discussing can actually be captured by identifying an objective standard. It's just that our current language does not include that.
So if we said the materials had to match the base of the building, that would be objective,
Which
not
that
subjective.
is what our accessory building
Yeah.
actually says.
Right, so if this was an
Is
accessory
that it
building,
needs
that
to
would.
match the building so that
It's
it's
leaning,
it's
exactly,
in
it's
line
leaning more
with it.
towards that objective approach.
We put a lot of weight in what staff advises. Staff is advising denial of this for aesthetic reasons, which are subjective.
You're right.
I like the sign. I like what Jackson said. I like the sign. I just don't like it in this setting. So if there's a way we can compromise on this in an objective way, give them some direction as to what to do.
You guys are walking a fine line. That's making my job real hard right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I lean towards, I think it's very objective to have materials matching. And, I mean, that's how I look at it. And if you want to define aesthetic being subjective, I still look at it as if materials are matching, that's how it's aesthetically equivalent to it. So I view it as objective, but that's my opinion, so.
But aesthetically, I think it's fine. I don't think it's an issue with so again, that's subjective. Who you're talking to, right?
There's no other board
even
formed
on the
concrete
commission, we're
anywhere
not
else on the
agreeing.
development, right?
Yeah, if there was anything in any of their buildings where there was some concrete, like Jackson said, I would probably view it differently, but there's not. So, and that's why I look at it and say, there's no way for me to tie it to this actual development or these apartment buildings, because it doesn't look like any of their apartment buildings.
It's more matching the
But
standard.
And I don't think that's subjective. It doesn't look like any of their apartment buildings. That, I would consider that objective.
But if you look at the rocks around it, and the setting that it's in.
I don't think you're trying to match the rocks, though. I think you're trying to match the actual development.
But I think
that's
what he's saying is aesthetically is, because we don't even agree as a commission on the aesthetics, so it can't be objective if we don't even agree.
Yep.
That's the definition of subjective.
How about this? It doesn't match their buildings.
My final piece of legal advice on this one is we have to consider it with the standards that we have adopted, not the ones that we would like to see or the way that we interpret them as being applied. We have to apply.
But we do not have one that says that has to match.
But there's a conflict between the state and what our stuff says.
And the state governs in that
There you
case.
go.
Yeah.
So we have to.
Subjectively,
So, here's one more piece of legal advice. I said I wasn't going to give you any more. I think you can make any decision that you would like based upon your discussion and hopefully considering the legal advice I've given. But you also, it sounds like you have an applicant who's willing to consider additional and other options, and maybe that should be explored.
And you're good at this.
So
Wanna
maybe to
ask Blake?
summarize,
We want to ask Blake
The-
based on our
the state,
comments, what he's,
yeah.
because of the way
I am too. That's why I don't, if he can figure this out.
because it's not objective, the state rules, and so we have no standing, and so they can put up whatever they want.
Our non-objective standards would not be applicable in this instance.
So our non-objective standards means they can do anything.
Well, they have to meet the objective standards.
They have to meet, yes, if we have objective standards, they're required to follow those.
So they
Which
fo-
ones are objective on the sheet?
Oh,
You want to
boy.
go through there?
The objective standards would be things you can measure.
The measurements and
like
the
on
size.
parking.
Economic
Amount
impact.
of brick or stone, or height, or, width, those kinds of
Service
things would be
issues.
yeah. If it was
So
an
it sounds like, it
ordinance-
sounds like this needs to be rewritten fairly quickly.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so he's gonna fall between the gray area.
Should we ask the applicant what his thoughts are?
Sure.
Blake?
Blake, you probably just heard our conversation and enjoyed it thoroughly.
You know, and from our perspective, I kind of fall in line with you guys in that there's not a clear cut and dry rule on what can or cannot be done here. I've listened to every comment, mostly subjective, and that's kind of where this design has fallen. It's where it started with planning, right? And that's how we ended up here. I can understand and appreciate your perspective, certainly. This really is your panel's decision at the end of the day. So with the updated colors to the building, I don't see how it could be that negative of impact aesthetically. It blends in with the natural landscapes of the surrounding development. You guys say building, but then you're also classifying development. So if we're taking into consideration the entire development, no, you don't see board formed concrete, but you do see concrete throughout the development. You see the xeriscape landscaping throughout the whole entrance of the community. It's not like it's just plopped in there. It's part of the whole landscaped area. So, I mean, I'd be open to changing some colors if that would help make the sign match a little more. One thing to take into consideration is that the logo, the letters do have a modern feel. That's their logo, their verbiage, their text. I can't really change that. So you put that copy on a traditional brick. I mean, those in and itself, those two together are going to clash. So I think, again, the whole goal, I think, from the ownership's perspective is that they're trying to update kind of an aging building and make it more current.
I appreciate that, Blake, and I'm laughing a little bit because I think some of what you said was subjective. And so, but with that being said, I do think very much so at this point, there's really not much we can say or do.
You to approve it and then get to work on that.
So, I do think blending into the rocks underneath may not be a good idea, but if this is sort of the direction you guys are going at this point, then we'll make a motion, as I don't think there's a lot more for the planning commission to say at this point until we change our ordinance.
It matches the sidewalk.
Matches the sidewalk and the rocks underneath.
And there is a tiny sliver of concrete at the base of
I
the
noticed
building.
that too. It really stood out. Yes.
Yes, so we appreciate you, Blake, we do actually. So we'll look at the planning commission to make a motion. I don't think there's a lot more discussion to be made on this one at this point.
Make a motion to approve item 3.3, request for conditional use approval of a monument sign at Emerson Apartments.
Second.
Thank you, Lauren, and a second by Daryl, and we'll call for a vote. Andy?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Jackson?
No.
And that one's approved with a vote of 4-1. We'll move on now to item 4.1, which is a request for approval for the master development agreement and design standards for the proposed Olympia development at approximately 7051 West and 126 South, which is 933 acres. And this is on for a public hearing as well, so we will address that in a little bit.
Good to stand up occasionally. Sorry, council, I feel like I'm blowing everything up for you tonight. I apologize.
You
I
make
didn't
it
realize that
interesting to say the least.
What's that?
You make it interesting to say the least.
Well, I always do, right. This item is on for a public hearing tonight. Just by way of background, this is a development agreement for a proposed annexation of an area known as Olympia Hills. This map indicates where that is located, just adjacent to the western and kind of northern boundary of the city. This is our current general plan that captures some of that area. It's mostly, you'll see the city's border. I'm going to use the tools here. Here's the city's border. Olympia would capture something like this, and under our current city general plan. As you were aware, you saw just a few weeks ago the update to the city's general plan, and recommended that move on to the city council. This is the future land use and development for the entire city. It now designates this area, which is Olympia, as a planned community. This is, again, the proposed area for annexation, Olympia, with their kind of heat map. You've also seen within your packet another land use master plan that further expands on this information and provides a little more detail about the potential land use types within these areas and the proposed densities within these areas. Just a timeline. In July 14th, the Herriman City Council voted to accept an annexation petition that was filed by the applicant. On July 15th, we and the colloquial we, as the Planning Commission and the City Attorney and staff, had a Planning Commission's work session to discuss the draft language of the Master Development Agreement. What you have in your packet now captures some of those changes. Those are redlined in your packet. You'll see those in both the MDA and the design guidelines. I got ahead of myself. July 15th was the work session where that was presented. I apologize. July 15th was also the public hearing on the draft design guidelines. July 21st was the work session, I'm sorry, where we had the discussion on the Master Development Agreement. August 5th, tonight, we have the Planning Commission public hearing on the draft Master Development Agreement, and this is important, and the design guidelines. Well, the public hearing on the design guidelines, I apologize, we've already had that. This is for just the development agreement. Your motion tonight, however, we went back and looked, there was no motion made on the design guidelines. The design guidelines are a part of the development agreement. The public hearing tonight is just on the language of the body of the development agreement. Your motion, if you do decide to make one tonight, would include the development agreement and the design guidelines.
Because they're part of it.
We parceled those out just so we didn't have to try to eat the whole elephant all at once, right? We said, let's do it 2 bites instead of 1. So again, if you do make a motion tonight, it should include both of the development agreement and the design guidelines. So that's all I have. Any questions for me this time?
That's a very fast timeline. That's less than a month so far. Very impressive.
When exactly was the public comments on the design guidelines?
I don't believe we had any public comment on that. During the public hearing, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have any
There was no public comment on that.
When was the public hearing on it?
It was the 15th. Public hearing on the design
We
guidelines.
didn't have any comments that night.
Or no comments made.
Yeah.
And then we did discuss previously during the work meeting some of the commission's hesitancy, like that we were maybe rushing through this and that it wasn't complete. It's staff's recommendation that this is, my recommendation, that this is complete for review by the Planning Commission. That may not mean it has all of the items that you as a Planning Commission would like to see. One of the things that you can do is to say, if you do decide to make a motion tonight, compile your list of modifications that you would recommend that the City Council consider as they have a public hearing on this item, as they continue to negotiate this item with the developer, with the applicant. And you can do that very specifically down to feet and setbacks and acreages, or you can be very general in your terms and saying this is what we would like the council to accomplish, and base that upon principles or ideas that you may not see in the current draft of the MDA. Any other questions for me?
Can you go through your red lines? Is
Yeah.
now a good time to do
Yeah,
that?
well, we can do that now, or we can have the public hearing.
Let's do the public hearing just because of the crowd here, and then we'll go back through it. Actually, the applicant now, we'll give them a couple minutes. Just if you have anything you want to share now, you will be, after the public hearing, you'll be invited to come back up. And so.
Ryan Button. I'm just happy to answer any questions. It's been a fun process. Spent many hours here the last few months with staff. They've been great to work with, and appreciated our work session we had a couple weeks ago with you guys, and that was very productive, and look forward to hearing what additional thoughts you have tonight.
So, sorry, you just made a comment. I want people to hear it. So you said you've been working with staff for the last few months, plural, right? No, I'm just curious because we got this timeline here. I'm just curious at when some of those discussions started
Yeah,
with the
it's
city.
been several months.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though this timeline might look quick, there has been some
Oh, yeah.
for a while. So I just wanted
Yeah,
to
I
make
can
sure that was
chime in.
clear.
And maybe this isn't the right time, but it has been published. There's been updates published to the website that show the meeting notes from when, just so people can go back and look at those meeting notes.
And that's an important point, Andy, is that this is a procedural timeline that we followed by state law. We're required to. The actual drafting of the development agreement goes back to the end of May, beginning of June, right? We sat in the work meeting room and hashed it out for quite a few months.
So if you have any questions for me, or I'll come up after public hearing if you
We'll
have
probably have you
questions.
come back up. We'll let the
Probably a few
public hearing and then go from there. So at this time, we will open the public hearing. I do want to read, just in case there's one person that may come up. Public comment and public policy procedure. The purpose of public comment is to allow citizens to address items on the agenda. Citizens requesting to address the commission will be asked to complete a written comment form and present it to Wendy, Deputy Recorder. In general, the chair will allow an individual 2 minutes to address the commission. A spokesperson recognized as representing a group in attendance may be allowed up to 5 minutes. And so I will open the public hearing at this time. And at this time, we'll close the public hearing.
Oh, maybe was there anyone online? No online?
No? Okay, thank you. And then I'll let you come back up, Chase.
Is it okay if I do it from here, my red lines?
I'm okay with that. We may ask you as well to come up after he goes through everything, so thank you.
So as you're aware, we did have a meeting on the 21st of July as the Planning Commission and staff to talk about some of the Planning Commission's interests, ideas, thoughts with regard to the development agreement that's been drafted. I have included many of those as red lines in this draft. Some of those, as we went back and negotiated with the city and the developer, we just weren't able to figure out the best way to do that. That being said, my recommendation again would be to say, we'd really like to see that in here still, if you as a planning commission determine that is something you would like to capture, and make that a modification in your recommendation to city council. That being said, I will go through page by page my red lines just so that we are aware of what has been changed since the last time you saw this draft on July 21st. And I'll let you ask me any questions and grill me as much as you want to from here. So I'll go off of the page numbers on the actual development agreement, not as they appear in your packet. That page number is on the bottom middle of each of the pages of the development agreement. The first one is page 3. I included a new definition for capital roads. This came up as we discussed the financing portion of the development agreement with the developer. We felt it was important to identify what those capital roads are. You'll see the definition there is pretty simple. It's just those items that are included in the city's transportation master plan, which is currently being amended to include the Olympia Hills area. So pretty simple definition update. Any questions on that? The next one would be on page 6, and that would be section 2.2.3, accounting for use of maximum residential units. What was changed here was just some language that identified when an accounting would be triggered and what information would be included. So it states now, with each development application, so anytime a development application is submitted to the city, the developer or builder would be required to submit an accounting. The accounting would include, on page 7, you'll see at the top of the page, acres, the amount of open space, and other items that are governed by the MDA that are within the proposed development. So each time a development application comes in, the city will receive an accounting that shows how many units have been used, how many units are being used within the proposed development, how many are remaining, and the same is true with open space and other items that this development agreement captures.
And I probably missed it, but what's the ability to transfer it between different areas or pods, or is it just everything in general? Because I know sometimes a builder will come in and the developer will say, okay, you have 100 units. And then the builder will go through and say, I only want to build 90. Does that mean the developer gets those back and gets to put them into another area in it? Or does it mean those were allocated 100, now he's lost that from other areas?
It's a good question. So you're saying, let me just make sure I understand correctly. You're saying if the master developer sells off to a builder 100 units and they only build 90, do they then get those 10 units to put somewhere else?
Correct.
Right. Because this is a planned community and the way this is drafted, that would be a possibility under this.
Because I know in a couple of our other MDAs, we had it based off pods so that it didn't become a huge cluster of homes to where if they did start to decrease in certain areas, it didn't come all of a sudden, now we're in this last area and we have 3,000 units in 100 acres.
Right.
And so it didn't, it sort of balanced it out, and then as it went through, it didn't get to where there was an overwhelming amount in a small area at the end or in a different area.
So we don't have language currently prohibiting the transfer of that, but what we do have is the land use master plan, which designates how many units can be built within a certain area.
So different
regardless of who
pods,
the
for
builder is.
instance.
Yeah, pod's a word that we're familiar with, right? And if we look at that land use master plan, you could designate this is a pod. We're not saying it's one builder.
Yeah, I know with the
necessarily.
map you have it mapped off in different, yeah.
So that is governed by that land use master plan to say this is how many units can actually go in there, or what the densities are within this place type.
They can move from builder to builder, but not pod to pod.
So the builder might come in and say, I've got 5 acres under this development agreement or whatever I've worked out with the master developer, I can build up to X. If I choose not to build that, it trickles back into the account for the master developer who can choose.
In that block or whatever, in that pod.
That block, exactly.
But it doesn't go from that pod to another one, technically.
And that's
But it could with how it's written right now.
Right. And that's an important point with a planned community in general, right, is we look at the total number of units going in within the total area, not necessarily what the average density is for the whole project, right?
Yeah, but I think some of the protection is that we don't have a zone that says we're expecting to build quarter acres here, and then because of this high density area, there was no way to put what they wanted in here, and all of a sudden they took 100 units, and all of a sudden those quarter acres become a point, less than a tenth, 0.08 or whatever it is.
It's a fair
I think
point.
it's trying to protect a balance of it, and I'm sort of asking, is there a protection of balance between these different zones that they have?
And to answer the specific example that you gave, the design guidelines would protect that, right? The design guidelines would say, even though you might be able to build additional apartment units, you still have a requirement to build so many single-family homes that comply with the design guidelines and the lot widths and the setbacks and those things. So,
Okay.
Good question. Again, it's a different approach to just saying, here's your lot, right? You have to have so many of this lot within the.
And it's saying in this area, the setbacks were 20 feet or 25 feet, and I did see that section located later on. And so we knew in this section that the setbacks would prevent there to be too many units moved from one to the other. It just wouldn't allow it. So I was just curious how that was.
Good point. And it looked like Forrest wanted to say something on this.
No, I was just going to say that the zones are what kind of dictate, there's a certain amount of zones. So the neighborhood zone, the town center zone, all those different zones, they're what regulate how many, the density and stuff like that. So assuming that they can't expand, say the town center zone, to the whole development, which would not follow the map that they show, that prevents.
And that's more of the question that I guess is coming out of this. Is it protected to where it doesn't cause that? And more or less, it's pods of what we've used in the past, and here it's zones.
Yeah.
So I
think I'm hearing pretty clearly that we are protected against that.
So we're protected against someone saying, hey, I didn't use all my apartment buildings. I'm going to now replace single-family homes with apartment buildings because we have a requirement that so many single-family homes get built and only so many apartment buildings get built. it sounded to me like Chris's initial concern was if we have a builder who's entitled to build X number of apartments and they only build X minus 20, those 20 units traditionally, right, what we've seen in other places in the city, get lost.
Well, we just had.
Or they get replaced and we lose another
or they
type
roll.
of.
There was a master development agreement a while back, and what had happened was they went, like we were keeping counts, and it went high density, high density, high density, high density, and we asked them to give the remaining, because they were starting to get a reasonable amount of land over here still, that they hadn't brought back to us with the pod counts. And so we requested to bring back all of those, because what it looked like was going to happen is they were going to just take the last pod or two and just donate it to the city and maintain their high density trend.
Right.
And that's what I want to make sure doesn't occur.
Yeah.
And so.
So procedurally, what I would recommend is if this is something you would like to include as a modification of the council.
Well, my question is, do I need to? Because based on what you're saying, it sounds like it's protected on zones, but if it's not, then yes.
It's protected, yeah, it is protected, right? There are those procedures, those like countings built in. I'll tell you this, we do not have language saying we will withhold building permits if you can't prove to us how you're gonna build your single family homes, right? There's not that provision that built into place. I'm not convinced we need that, because I think you can still show through standard engineering principles all the land that you've got and all the single-family homes and townhomes that you're required to build under the development agreement. You're not going to fit in there if what you're proposing is actually approved. So I don't think we need to have that language in there, because that approval is done at a staff level based upon the remaining land, using that information provided in the accounting.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure that and zoning, this body's pretty familiar with, that it allows it to become what we're seeing and not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of units they have the ability to build, and it could really turn into something other than what is shown to us right now.
Correct.
If we're not careful.
Any other questions on that item?
I'm sorry. This is
Yeah,
gonna be
no,
a
go
long
ahead,
night.
Chris. No, this is what this meeting is intended for, so. Next item was 2.4, also on page 7. We had some substantial discussion about the traffic impact study. I think I addressed a lot of the commission's concerns at the last meeting, but there have been just a few updates. The end of 2.4 simply just states that if a letter is required, the city can go in and review that traffic engineer's letter to look at the assumptions and the methodologies that they used in determining compliance with the traffic impact study. You'll also see a change to section 2.4.1.1, the scope of the updated traffic impact study. Again, this is going to be required if a proposed development comes in and a traffic engineer determines that the impacts of that proposed development do not comply with the underlying traffic impact study, right? If they're changing the number of units that they're putting or the type of units that they're putting in, and the impacts are going to be greater than what was anticipated in the underlying traffic impact study, they would have to go in and get an additional traffic impact study to determine what those new impacts are going to be. And this section 2.4.1.1 just defines what they would have to look at.
So, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a lot of questions now. So 2.4, and with what you just spoke about, I noticed that you say that another traffic engineer letter prior to submission of a development application. Is that saying that we fall below D? Now all of a sudden we need another engineer or traffic study to be done to show that there's some way to do it. If they can't get it to where it goes above D, that's a stop until a solution is done? Is that what we're saying?
Yes. So if a development application is submitted, it's required to have a letter from a traffic engineer stating that the proposed development complies with the traffic impact study. There's an underlying traffic impact study for the entire project based upon the land use plan that we're looking at, right? If it changes, the land use plan, and the impacts are different, and it drops below that level D, like you identified, Chris, then they have to go in and do an additional traffic impact study for that proposed development and determine what the improvements would need to be to whatever system it is, obviously our transportation system, to bring it back up to that level. Is that good, Jonathan?
So the trigger is per development. Yeah.
So it's likely, it's very likely, and Jonathan could speak to this, that as a proposed development comes in, a traffic engineer assesses that and says, this complies with the level of service that we have determined from the beginning. And so no additional study needs to take place. And we're building roads based upon that, right? So if something comes in that changes that anticipated impact, we're going to say, all right, let's stop for a minute, do an additional traffic impact study, because the impact might be very minor, right? And it might require just a modification of shifting housing types around or something of that degree, right?
Now, with that being said, that's limited to the roads within the development, or is that applicable to the roads that are going out of the development affected by the development?
It can do both. Our traffic impact study that's being updated will identify impacts to on-site, so Olympia-specific transportation corridors, as well as off-site.
So it's very clear prior to submission of a development application. So it will put a stop to make sure that we can get in compliance. If we can't, we got to find a solution, and then at that point, the development can continue.
Right. And as we've discussed before, there will be a proportionate share that the developer will be responsible for. That updated traffic impact study, if they're required to do it, will also identify what that updated proportionate share is.
Okay. Well, I like the add there. So.
Page 8, section 2.4.3 is just a dispute resolution, right? If we can't agree about what the traffic engineer's letter is stating, this is just laying out the process whereby we resolve that dispute.
It's got mediator in there.
Oh, our favorite, yeah. As many times as we can avoid court, the better, right?
I'm not worried. You guys will figure it out.
That's right.
Let's go to the next page.
Also on page 8, this is something, I believe this is Daryl that requested this, 2.5.1 with regard to the telecommunication easement, that it not be over the roads, right? It just be an ingress easement that allows them access within our right-of-way. Page 9, section 2.8. This refers back to the accounting. This is just stating that any time the developer also sells off a parcel or a subdivision, even before a development application is submitted, if they are to sell off a piece to a developer or to a builder, that would require them to also submit an accounting, just so we have an idea of how many units builder A is actually going to construct within that area. Skipping to page 13, we get to the independent review committee. You won't see a lot of red lines here because we went back as a city and with the master developer to try to figure out the best way to capture what it is that the Planning Commission identified. If I could just restate that, it sounded to me that the Planning Commission's concern was, how do we involve the public's input in the review process, right? That has traditionally been what you as a Planning Commission have done, right? We've held public hearings, we've allowed public comment on certain things to get feedback on development. As we looked at ways that we could do that, we threw around a couple of options and just weren't really sure what we might even propose. So we had a couple of suggestions, one being maybe making this a quasi-public meeting, right? Or even just a public meeting, noticing it up if a certain application type was submitted to the IRC for review, right? If it's a subdivision or a conditional use, or I don't know what else, again, the Planning Commission would like to see the public's input on, but that was one suggestion. Another suggestion was having IRC review and then having it come back to the Planning Commission for consent style approval, right? We don't have a detailed discussion, but we review what the IRC looked at and then make a consent motion based upon that finding, right? You could always pull that off, have a larger discussion about it. Again, you're seeing some of the options that we threw around, just not really sure what it was that the Planning Commission would like to see there, so that might be something that you want to discuss as part of tonight's meeting.
I would like some clarity on master developer and city, what exactly the city definition is.
Yeah.
Because I question if that's city council with staff, if that's city staff, if that's, who will determine who is going to be placed in these positions? And at least from my perspective, and I think it probably needs to be tied to the city council as those represent the community at this point.
I think that's an easy change. I recognize that ambiguity now, and I think that's an easy change.
Yeah, I do think city staff needs to be there to help guide them, obviously, but.
So 4.2, let's just call out who is on that, right? So 4.2 identifies the administrator specifically, which under this MDA would be Blake, would be our community development director. Section 4.2.1, which you're referring to, Chris, I think says master developer and city shall select the neutral parties there. I think that's an easy switch to make to just say council. And I think that's an appropriate one, right? We could have the council pass a resolution saying, this is our person on that board. That's not a...
Yeah. I know there's still some mixed thoughts on this, because this does, at this point, it pretty much, once this MDA leaves us, the city planning will not see this development again, ever. And so that there is some mixed emotions, and I will put it as emotions, because it's trying to understand how to look at from ordinance perspective, from zoning, from overall master development agreement, how to make sure everything's in line, and hopefully that this body is able to do that.
So one thing I might add, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but there is a provision in here that requires 4-year annual reviews. That process doesn't implicitly or explicitly include the Planning Commission, but I think that it's valuable, based upon what I'm hearing you say, Chris, to actually say the parties, you could work the Planning Commission into that 4-year review process as well, right?
But the question is, are you reviewing the master development agreement, the decisions that have been made, and what is happening with zoning? Because if it's not tied to zoning ordinances, and the master development agreement or general plan, this body really shouldn't be tied to it. If it's only tied to choosing a new IRC member to represent, at least in my opinion, I don't think that's something this body should be involved in.
Well, I'll disagree with you just a little bit, because
But that's okay.
We've been doing that a lot. I've been great at that tonight. So this is in and of itself a zoning ordinance, right? This is a land use ordinance that is being adopted in the form of a master development agreement. So to your point, this would actually involve Planning Commission review.
But this body doesn't typically go through, for no better words, the hiring process of someone.
No, you're right.
Or the interview
every
process
little
of
detail would
someone.
come back, but
So does that make sense? I guess I'm wondering what the role of this body would be in trying to choose someone to represent this.
I don't think that's what, I think you're just saying involvement in that 4-year discussion. Every 4 years, the city gets together, and how can the Planning Commission be involved in that process, not choosing who sits on the IRC.
But isn't that the 4-year, pretty much it's reappointing someone or appointing someone new?
No.
that might be part of it, but
Part of it,
the
yeah.
other part of it is sitting down at this 4-year review and saying, did we get it right? Right? Did we miss anything? Because as we all know, every development agreement that we've had with the city has at one point been amended, or we've had a request to amend it. And that's just the nature of agreements that are 20, 30 years in the future.
Is 4 years frequent enough?
It's a good question. What we looked at in determining this period is we didn't want to make it a political issue. So we said we can do it every 4 years on off election years, right? That way you're still giving different planning commissions, different city councils an opportunity to go in and review and have a discussion with the master developer about the terms of the agreement, but you're not doing it during a political season when it might become a less of a administrative and what's best for the city approach, right? So it was calculated. I don't know that we made the right call, but that was our approach in tackling that.
So maybe that's the question. Is this a 20-year, 30-year development? I mean, how long, what's the?
It'll be 20.
So the term, let me
Right.
go to the term section. I don't have it off the top of my head.
I'm guessing it'll be 20, somewhere in there.
So the term is on page 20, 9.6. The term continues until December 31st, 2045. So
24 years.
24 years. It does have a renewal period, so if they're not in default, it renews for an additional 10 years and then terminates upon that time.
Maybe 4 years is enough then.
I am curious from the
So-
planning commission perspective, the IRC.
So maybe, I always like to take things to the extreme to understand it. So if we were to say, yeah, this looks great as it's written tonight, and it went to council and they said, yeah, that's great, this is the last public meeting this would ever have for 34 years.
If it's amended, it's been our procedure, and I believe state law now requires it to go through the planning commission again. So it would,
What you're talking about in 20 years, 24 years.
an amendment, is that what you were asking,
Oh.
Jackson?
No, I'm just saying, if we were to accept this as written,
Oh.
and
Yes.
with the 4-year reviews, this meeting, and then if the city council were to approve it, those would be the last public hearings that this would have for the next 24 to 34 years.
Possibly,
Unless there's amendment, yes.
yes.
Correct. This is it.
Wow.
That's why I have a, yeah, that's why the
It's only a
IRC,
$2
I'm having a
billion
tough time.
development.
Yeah, I'm having a tough time with this one.
And I will say, that's not unlike a zoning ordinance that gets adopted as well, right? A zoning ordinance could get adopted and applied to land, and
Yeah, but then we also have, reviews of those, zoning.
And we update the general plan.
And we update the general plan.
General plan gets updated, everything gets updated, and which goes through a public process.
sure.
This is allowing less, to some perspective, less eyeballs outside of the IRC from city council and planning commission
And
than
maybe,
any other development, any other builder, anything that we've seen.
even Rosecrest.
Yeah, yeah, that to me is, it's almost.
Red flag.
Yeah, it's a red flag
Wait,
in my mind a
almost.
little bit.
Just from a perception standpoint, the IRC starts to look like a smoky back room.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a bureaucracy. I mean, the fact that they're all neutral, they don't have a stake in, the development, there's no oversight.
There's no representatives for the city
Right.
with influence or looking at
Kinda
this
like
at that point.
There are.
Letting
The
go of my-
administrators. Right.
And maybe it would be good for me to review this process again. Would that be helpful to just go through that process again? So the IRC serves as a body to determine whether or not, using the word objectively again, a development application complies with the standards within the development agreement, right? You have on that board the administrator, which is our community development director, who represents the city's interest to a degree, but also, again, is viewing this objectively, a development application. You have a neutral architect who is reviewing it, a neutral land planner, a representative from the ARC, and a representative designed by the master developer. So you have this body on there who is only making a recommendation to the community development director. The community development director, Blake, or even staff can say, thank you, IRC, for reviewing this, but we don't believe that you got it right. And there are processes built into the development agreement to allow for a dispute resolution of a development application that the city believes was not sufficiently reviewed by the IRC. So it's a process that we thought would reduce the bureaucracy, rather, right, by saying we are streamlining the process where we can, not trying to avoid the planning commission's review of anything, but just saying, if we've established what the requirements are, who can we plug in to review those requirements when a development application comes in? So, and again, it's a draft language, right? So the purpose of this meeting is to discuss the concerns that we have with that, and happy to walk through any of those with you that you do have.
So does Blake have enough teeth in this as a part of the IRC? I guess that's
Right.
the other part. Is he one vote of 5 then, so the other 4 can, or is it a consensus, or is it?
So you do have an odd number there of 5. They might not be in agreement on something and vote 3-2 to recommend it to the city. But Blake, at the city level, and staff can still say, no, we think you got it wrong. Again, that would have those dispute processes built in. The dispute process is again an objective one. It says IRC suggested approval, staff, and I'm just playing us out a scenario here. IRC suggested approval, staff said, no, that approval is incorrect. We are now having an additional neutral party come in and say, lay it all out to me, what's happening here, and then they make a determination.
So even in the event that there's a dispute, it's still outside of the city to, to basically to control anything in the development.
Say that one more time, Forrest.
If there's a dispute, it's not going within the city system to, to satisfy that dispute or to work through that dispute. It's through a separate party outside of the city. I'm just trying to think, are we basically just washing our hands of any responsibility for the next 24 years and hoping that neutral parties will have the design intent that we have, or the knowledge that we have, or the background of the city itself in mind when making these decisions? And yeah, that's subjective, but I think that's our duty as a planning commission, is to be subjective and help the city make those decisions. So I'm a little concerned that we're passing the buck.
Forum.
Yeah,
But
within
this-
a public forum, because you're totally outside the public forum.
Right.
It's a little concerning.
Sure. No,
It looks very much so like forming a new planning commission for this specific master development agreement.
It's not necessarily, yeah.
That's not, yeah,
That's what it looks
necessarily
very
under the purview
similar
of
to.
the
It's
city
a
council.
non-public,
A non-public planning commission body for this.
30,000 future residents.
not just non-public, but not, not, I guess, the city has no say other than one position.
Right,
Not,
right.
no, they have the say on the two neutral as well, right?
They have a say on the two neutrals,
Yeah.
but
I know, I'm just saying,
But
it's not one, they do have a say on two.
Yeah, so Blake becomes the city advocate. But unfortunately, there's nothing that requires Blake to actually be a citizen of Herriman. So whoever that person is, or those two people are, they may not have.
But we know you are right now, Blake.
They may not have
You
a
better move
vested
quick.
vested interest in that.
interest in protecting the city's future look, the city's future feel, the city's growth patterns.
And the design standards will do a lot of that. And so, but it is going to be the gray area where will always be questioned. And at least I feel like the current process, the gray area becomes a compromise between the developer builder and the city planning commission / if it has to go to council after, which it sometimes does.
Right.
It tends to be a compromise that works out. And I question if IRC will be any sort of compromise, or if it meets the minimum requirement, we have to do nothing else.
And one of the things I brought up at the last meeting, and this isn't me pushing back, this is just me making an observation and a legal opinion, is that if it meets the minimum requirement, you as a planning commission can't deny it, right? And that was the objective here, is to say, if we have a development application that meets the minimum requirements, and we don't like the minimum requirements, then it's our job to raise that minimum requirement, right? And that's part of this process that we're doing here as well. But the IRC's position would be to say, they do meet the minimum requirement, right? They can ask them, and there is some subjectivity to that, to your point, Forrest, right? You're gonna have an architect on there who says, the intent, which is spelled out in the design guidelines, which you can pull up and read, says that you're trying to achieve this. You're proposing X. I don't believe that X actually accomplishes the intent, right? An engineer might not have that scope of intent in their mind, right? And the land planner might have a different scope, and Blake, representing the city, might have a different perspective. So that was the objective behind the IRC, is to say, you as the planning commission might get an application, and if it meets the minimum requirements, you can't deny it, right? Just like we saw with the conditional use request tonight. If it meets the standards, and although there were some issues with that.
But
we
I think a
can't say
great
no,
example
right?
is, I don't know why I can't ever remember it, Edge Homes, wherever here that's
Mountain
building,
Ridge.
Mountain Ridge, where we asked a simple change that we wanted it to be a paved path that went all the way to
Right.
the trail. And they're like, yeah, makes no difference to us, but it made a big difference in the fill.
And that's what the residents wanted, right?
Yeah,
And
so
we sat
those
down,
things will not occur
I don't think they
Well,
will.
and
in
that's-
this. They won't ever occur
I
in
don't think
this,
they
I
will.
don't think.
We could say we want them
Right.
to, I don't, I just,
And
I don't know. I don't
when we
agree
sit
they
down with
would
the
either.
developer, they're not opposed to that process. And that was part of the discussion, is we're just not sure how to build that in to the IRC, right? We've identified what the intent of the IRC is, and the city and the master, or at least staff and the master developer, when we talked about that, based upon what the planning commission had discussed, said, how do we reach that, right? How do we help the,
Because I always found it
So let
interesting.
me-
Well, go ahead, Jackson.
So could the IRC be set up to meet on the first and second Thursday of every month at 5 o'clock?
you could, like we said.
That
we
way
could-
they get their own planning commission and they can get it approved as quick as they want, and then they can tell us about it, whatever, afterward.
Yeah, you could set up a public meeting, and that was one of the solutions that we came up with, right? The benefit there is you're not working against 5 people's other schedules, right? You're paying these individuals to come and be here on part of this, as part of this board. But that was one of the things that we had discussed. And I don't know if you think it'd be helpful to hear from the developer on this, because like I said, we actually had a pretty robust discussion, and they acknowledged, yes, that's a legitimate thing to incorporate, and they're not opposed to having public input. We just weren't sure how to plug that in.
I guess, I just want to have teeth, because to me, telling them they've got to meet before us so we can then tell us, that doesn't do anything for me. Just that they're just going to tell us, that's not a, I mean, our biggest complaint we always have up here is when people come up and there's a decision made years before that we're bound to. That, again, we're not trying to change the fundamental development, it's just there are things that our job as a planning commission is to affect. And I think we have to find a way to include that because we see things, we've got suggestions, we've made developments better because of our sets of eyes on it, that
Well, and
if we
design,
take us out of it and the public out of it, we will not get that.
you know,
We
the
will not.
design guidelines aren't perfect.
Nope, they're not.
They're not like the old code that basically said, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, can't do this. It's more of this is the vision we want to see. But that takes oversight. Because you have to have oversight if you don't describe everything that's happening within the development, so.
And I think a good example is the master development agreement for the party up by Real Salt Lake. I remember they came in the first time in, and it was a frustrated conversation back and forth. It was. I mean, I'm not going to hide it. And after we went through a couple different items, and they looked at some things, and we talked to them, and everything else went back and forth, it became really simple after that. It was like they came in, they showed what they had. The biggest thing was just making sure they had the layout of what we wanted to see. And I think the next 4 or 5 things they brought in were, okay, good, approved, bye. And it almost became that simple at that point. And some of the things they missed, which sort of cracked me up, is they couldn't fit a garbage can in the garage. They had a whole development that couldn't fit a garbage can in the garage. And so they would have been out on the street with no parking or area on the street. They would have been just out on the street. And it's not like we're trying to make it harder, because we really don't want to. What we want to do is just get to where now it's transparent. The community can see it because these are public meetings. They're aware of what's happening, which has been, to be honest, that's why the referendum occurred, is nothing was transparent enough. And we may be going down a path where there becomes a problem if we're not careful. So.
You actually brought up a good question about maybe the developer, and I'll ask you first, Chase. What is the benefit of the IRC to the city? I can see it for the developer. It gets things streamlined and it's faster, and
It's a great question.
Anytime you can cut down the amount of time it takes to get your entitlements is huge, because I know that's 2 months of financing they don't have to deal with. But what's the benefit to the city?
It eats up a lot of staff time reviewing these applications.
But wouldn't you still review them with the IRC?
We would review the review, right? We would see the methodologies, we would look at what their findings were. And maybe I can let staff, I've got planning staff who review, planning and engineering staff who review these types of applications. That's one substantial benefit. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to talk to that.
Well, I don't want to lay off Clint, so.
Clint's always looking for.
This is why Mike went on vacation, huh?
I know. Yeah, he didn't want to come back.
Yeah. In terms of saving time for staff, I mean, like Chase said, we'd still review it as we normally would. There wouldn't be like staff reports, noticing, which takes a lot of time to put together and send out to the public. So there would be that element of time saving that we could spend on reviewing other things and updating our city ordinance.
So that helps staff.
Monument signs.
How does that help the residents?
Yeah.
I was going to say that, yeah, to me, that's not, I respect our staff, it's not anything, but that to me is not a benefit to the residents.
And I'm not trying to shirk that interest, right? I'm not trying to get around that. But what I am recognizing is this is a contract that is vesting certain rights at this time for the term of this agreement. And I acknowledge that there are residents in the future and planning and city staff and planning commissions and city councils that might not like that. That is the very nature of a development agreement though, right? And that cuts both ways, however, right? It sounds very favorable to the developer right now, but it also cuts both ways because we as a city are locking in development that we are determining now is beneficial for the city. So it sounds, like I said, very favorable to the developer, but it cuts both ways in a lot of instances. And that's simply the nature of an agreement, right? When you're entering into an agreement for an extended period of time, that's the very nature of it.
And I guess that's where I go back, Chase. It's not, I know there's not this intent to pressure, but this is huge. This affects the residents of the city for the next 30 years. And
30,000 of them directly.
And this. It's just a lot.
Have there been other examples of this type of IRC for a town level development? Because this is what this is. This is a town level.
It's an entire town.
It's an entire town.
Small
Small city. I mean,
Daybreak has a model very much like this where they have an architectural review committee that reviews
that's different
applications.
though, because
Well,
their arc is through Daybreak.
And they make their recommendation to, my understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, they make their review of a development application, they make their recommendation to the planning commission who adopts that as a consent item.
So it does go to a public
Still goes
hearing.
to the planning commission.
And
Interesting.
a public hearing, and then they accept it.
Right.
And so the public hearing is still available to the community on a lot of items.
So
Well, no, because if they pull it off and schedule one, but it's, again, this is my understanding of how that system works. I haven't really gone.
But it's still
headfirst into it.
transparent to the community with
Right,
how
and-
it's done, is
And
what I'm saying.
I want to make clear, I'm not trying to shirk the transparency. And in fact, again, that's one of the things we talked about with the developers. How do we implement that into this process? Is how do we get the public feedback into this, right?
Because I know Daybreak did, they tried to do a couple times, they had their development laid out and they tried to follow it and, the community just said, no, we don't want these apartments in this area here. And it became a big problem for Daybreak. And they ended up having the public, comments and they ended up changing it. But through this, there's no public.
And I do want to say one thing, Chase. Just because of the last 7 years, the only reason why I'm even questioning or looking through this is I don't want to put more problems into the process of this, because I'm very familiar with master development agreements at this point with the last 3 or 4 we've had. And in the most part, they come to us, we talk through it, it's done. I mean, rarely does it go to a second or third meeting anymore. But it also allows a transparency and ability for citizens to see what's happening in their neighborhoods and in their communities, which it sounds like this is cutting that out. And it could cause more problems than solutions. If this became a solution that I think was for the better good of the process and the people and the community and just the city staff and everything, and that's where I'm struggling to try to figure out if that is what it is. That's where a lot of these questions are coming from for me. Because if it does, I'm all for it. I just can't see it yet.
Right. And that would be my advice is let's talk about that, right? This was a proposal that we had worked out with staff during our working group meetings of saying, all right, let's identify some of the things that we can do. Obviously, we didn't capture these concerns sufficiently enough, so I think.
Do you think it's okay, and I'm going to ask the Planning Commission, do you want to hear opinions from the developer on some of their thoughts on the IRC and what they think about it?
Sure.
This it probably would be beneficial to at least hear their side if they want to take a minute or two. And it might be 10 or 15, but I'll say a minute or two.
You can cut them off anytime.
Because we really want to know. I'm trying to figure out, because you're very familiar with some of the problems with that have occurred, and I don't want that to occur. If this is the best for streamlining everything, I'd like to see that. If it's not, I want to find a solution.
No, I think I think you have really valid concerns, truthfully. I think the thing we've been trying to figure out how to avoid is from our perspective, it's hard to sit in meetings, not like this, but in meetings in rooms like this.
It's okay if you mean this meeting too.
Well, no, I don't. This is good. This is actually productive. When you sit through a long public hearing and the residents, when the Planning Commission really can't say no. Let's just say it's a standard subdivision and it's just we'll just call it a meat and potato subdivision, and they want to use it as an opportunity to come and vent and complain about everything else. And then at the end, you guys say, well, it meets our standards, we have to approve it. Now we've just sent a mob out that's angry because they weren't listened to, because they're just there to complain about other things. So I don't know so we were trying to figure out a way to streamline it and say, hey, if it meets certain standards, or if it's super straightforward, or it's not really, does it comply, and it's not, do I like the shutters on that house or whatever? I mean, if it's really straightforward, we thought, in a way, it kind of feels disingenuous. I don't like disappointing people either, just like you don't, and having all these people, and it's like, sorry, like.
So there's one thing I've noticed, and you guys have been doing it probably longer than I have, so you probably know better, but I've come to the conclusion that if you're proactive, you have a better long-term reaction. If we're reactive, meaning all of a sudden it's being built and nobody knew it was happening, you tend to have a lot more backlash. And so, at least from my perspective, it's a lot easier to say there was a community meeting about it. It was in the Planning Commission. This is what was done. You could have came and heard it. It wasn't hidden from you. We wanted you to know about it. But if all of a sudden everything's starting to go up and it went through this IRC and the community never heard about it, it tends to become a huge backlash. And that's where I'm trying to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure out, because I don't have an answer for you, what's the best way? Because I would rather have an angry mob of 100 people in here for one night than a social media frenzy for the next 3 months.
I know. We all have to delete Facebook, I think.
You know what I mean. You know what I mean, though.
I know. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we clearly don't have a silver bullet here. I don't think there's a perfect answer. I don't think bringing everything back here. I don't think everything.
I think there's some items that should never come back here. But that's a whole different thing.
Well, and so maybe that's the key. Is
there's some things I believe the staff could answer, and they don't need to come back. They don't need to go through an IRC. They don't need to go through us. Right. There are some items that fall in that category, to where I don't even know why an IRC would need to see them. I do believe there's some items in that category.
So maybe that's the key, is to create a matrix of some sort, or a table that says, if it fits in these categories, this is the body that reviews it and spits it out. If it hits this level, obviously, I think a conditional use or something like that, or home occupations need a public hearing, right? Well, I would support that idea, totally. But if it's super straightforward and it's all administrative, then I would say, let's not waste your time
Agreed.
That would be that's just coming from me. I'd like to come up with a way to, not to streamline it just for the benefit of us. It's cheaper for me to come to you than to pay an architect and an engineer and whoever else to sit in this meeting during the day. That's not a cheap meeting that I get to pay for. I don't have to pay you. I have an application fee, but it doesn't compensate. You guys work for free as far as I'm concerned, which isn't fair, but
far
that's
as
not for me to make
Yeah,
that
my
decision.
family thinks that too.
Huh? So, anyway, so there's a benefit to streamlining, yes. I think we get a better product out of an IRC where we can sit in a room more like that. I think that's a more productive place to have a discussion, like we had with you guys a couple weeks ago. It's easier, but the public comment thing, I think there's things that when we make changes to the plan or want to amend the plan, obviously that has to come through the city. That would be an amendment to the MDA. That would require full public hearings. But I think that's the benefit to master development or a master plan community, is that people that are moving in there are buying into that plan, and they kind of know what they're getting when they go in. If we, I keep using this Amazon warehouse. If I would decide I'm going to go throw an Amazon warehouse in the middle of what was supposed to be a downtown area, that's a problem to me. Like, that is a total change to the project. So anyway, I just would support some sort of maybe a hybrid approach of saying these items are handled at IRC, or maybe it's not an IRC, maybe it's at staff level or with, and I don't know exactly what those columns would
Yeah.
be. This goes to Planning Commission. So, Bruce?
Your support has some words.
Mr. Chairman, I'm counsel for the project, Bruce Beard. I think it's important that we understand that we've heard your concerns this time and last time, and I think staff has heard them clearly, and you clearly want some more of a public process on some of these things. I would hope that what you do tonight would be make a recommendation to the City Council to approve the development agreement with an attempt to try to figure out a way to get more public input into the process. We've worked pretty hard on this, and we tried to do this. The theory was we took the Daybreak model, where they had the ARC, had 100% approval on it. And we tried to give the city more control than the Daybreak model to precisely meet your concerns. Because I've personally sat in on, because I was counsel for Daybreak for a while, on a number of those meetings where even though it came to the Planning Commission had absolutely no say in it. So because the ARC had approved it. So we, as working with your staff, try to say, okay, how can we give the city more control rather than just trusting the ARC? So we actually put this process together to give the city more control than in the Daybreak model and more functional control. But we've heard that you have some issues about having public participation in which flows where. We would just ask for a favorable recommendation tonight with those concerns expressed to the council.
Yeah,
and I think
thank
we've
you.
heard them for about an hour tonight
Yeah.
and the last night too.
Yeah, so because it sounds like you're familiar, so the IRC or in Daybreak does bring it back to the Planning Commission, and then it proceeds forward from that point, is what you're saying?
It brings it back to the Planning Commission, but it's a show trial. The Planning
But it makes it public at that point, so the public's aware of it from that perspective at that point.
But all they are is angry. I mean, I sat through a meeting in Daybreak, more than one, as a matter of fact, as Daybreak's counsel. And it went to the Planning Commission after the ARC, but no matter how much the neighbors hated it, the answer was, there's nothing we can do about it. And that's the worst of all possible worlds. So what we've tried to build was a way to get the city the input up front. This didn't spring out of thin air. We thought carefully through the staff how to make this work. And if some of them you think maybe come back, or the council thinks some of them should come back to the Planning Commission, or maybe there's a public hearing process in front of the IRC, or there's several other ways to do it, but we put this on the table. We understand what your concerns are, and obviously this is a policy call that the City Council is going to make after hearing all of your good input. And the council's going to make the call on it in the end, but I don't think there's any doubt that everybody's heard your input, and I guarantee that staff will do it, and we hope that you'd make a recommendation saying to the effect of, we recommend you approve the MDA and the design guidelines, but we think you should create a mechanism for more public or Planning Commission involvement. and then we'd work carefully with staff on that.
Thank you for your thoughts.
As he was talking, what about, in response to the public issue.
One quick question.
Sorry, go ahead.
How-
No, go ahead.
How long does the
Bruce?
ARC process take with,
He's got one more question here, sorry.
how long does the ARC process take with Daybreak on a,
And Daybreak?
on a new project?
I'm sorry?
What is your entitlement process? How long does that process take with ARC?
On the way we
Daybreak?
crafted it here, it takes the time that it needs to
Not the
take.
draft here, he asked about Daybreak.
Daybreak?
How long does the review take with the ARC
The
and
answer
Daybreak?
to that question is, I don't know, because I only got called in when people were screaming and hollering at the planning commission, and I'm sort of the designated arrow catcher. So I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of the ARC. It's just when people start screaming.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I've been a spear catcher before. It's not fun.
No, on fire too, right? No.
Chase, before when this came up, when we had the public outcry, I would say a few years ago, that's what the community outreach program grew from that. What if there were a process where we were, because Daryl's sitting here kind of get a list of kind of that matrix they're talking about. And I think any time it's going to come back to us, rather than, to their point, rather than having angry citizens here, residents here, what if we give them that forum in a community outreach meeting where they can come out and we're very open and we say, hey, like, there might not be anything we can do, but what are your recommendations? What would you like to see? And then they bring that to the planning commission. I mean, whoever hosts that meeting can then come report to us, and then we can just talk and try to come up with some suggestions, because I just want it to have a little bit of teeth too, where there can, you're right, I don't want the angry residents. I've been that angry resident before, right? But still a way to involve them, but yet, I think we've got to be clear if there isn't a way to affect it, but there still is. Most developers we worked with have been open to listening to these suggestions and working with us, and I mean,
It's my opinion that having the public the opportunity to be heard, to put their comments on the record, is very valuable, and it helps with all the transparency.
And it does encourage change.
It does encourage change, and it will encourage change if you take it away. Because if you take away the people's ability to have a voice in their own community, your government won't be standing much longer. It'll be switched out. I'm not saying government type, I'm saying the actual individuals will be voted out if they just eliminated the public's voice. And so that concerns me, and I think that we really do need to get the public's input, at least in some of these, as the direction goes.
Lauren had a good recommendation. I think as your council, I've identified and heard loud and clear what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I think I would now say, how do we solve that problem, right? Do we can this thing entirely, or do we keep parts of it that we like? Do we add to it to try to accomplish what that intent is of the planning commission?
I do believe and I do believe that the IRC, honestly, I believe a portion of what is being implemented or what they want to see that should be streamlined through, city staff can take care of. And I believe there's a large portion of it. I do believe there's a portion of it that needs to go through the process that has been built over the last 4 or 5 years. Because what's happening currently with the process of how it's been coming through the community and the city planning commission and everything else has been a process that the community helped put together over the last 5 years. And we're sort of just saying, we're not going to do that anymore. And so I think we got to be really careful about that. But I do think there's a large amount of items that should and could go to city staff and just be done at that point. I mean, you could say you could have an IRC to help with that, but to be honest, I have a lot of trust in our city staff that they can accomplish a lot of this without an IRC in place for a lot of these items. And so that's sort of some of my opinion on that. But let's think about this as we continue on, or it might be a long night. And then,
It's gonna be a long night, Chris.
yeah,
We're
and
having
then
a
when we
blast.
make a recommendation, we can look at addressing this one last time and then making a recommendation on what we'd like to see happen with this, if that's okay by this body.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
go ahead, Chase.
I'll move on to page 14, open space.
We're cruising.
And we are cruising. We are cruising. Page 14, open space, section 6.1 was just a minor change in the middle of that provision stating that the administrator will consult with city staff when considering whether to waive the quarter-mile requirement. So, as we discussed last time, there is a requirement that a park be located within a quarter-mile of each residential unit within the project. If a builder comes and says, hey, I've got a better idea for open space, they can submit that. It can be reviewed by the administrator. He will, as you'll see now, consult with the appropriate city staff, right, our Parks Department, whatever other departments we need to determine whether to waive that requirement for a specific development application.
I like that. The only thing that I wonder if we could do is if we put something in the language of waive it if a unique or larger open space is provided. And you could maybe allocate what that might be, but something maybe in words like that, because I know sometimes you get unique open space opportunities that occur, like you said, and then sometimes you also get some that are larger, and I think that would be a good way to waive that.
Okay. So if, I've got some language in there, but I would just recommend that you include that as part of a modification, right? If you want council to address open space more thoroughly, maybe make that as a recommendation in your motion. Section 6.2.1, the delayed open space dedication. So we talked about this last time. We didn't have the language put into the draft agreement that you saw at the last meeting on the 21st. So this is just the language that is essentially stating that the developer can, and we talked about this a bit in the work meeting, right? This is the point you brought up, Chris. The developer cannot get more than 10% behind on their open space dedications. So they, under this development agreement, can develop 50 acres, and their dedication requirement is 10 acres for that development. They don't have to include it within that project, but they have to include it, or within that development, but they have to include it within the project as a whole.
But we're talking about rewording this, because technically that's 50% open space. Yeah.
I'll work on that so it says what we mean it to say, but correct. The catch-up provision is essentially just stating that we can withhold building permits until you demonstrate how you're going to make up that deficit, if there is one, that's created by the pro rata dedication. Page 16, section 7.1.1, this is an administrative modification. We've talked about that process ad nauseum. Again, this is just stating that the administrator will work with city staff to make a determination on administrative modifications. That's something we do in practice, but there was some concern from the council that we just include language stating that we will also consult with city staff in making an administrative modification. If I recall, that might be the nature of the red lines for the development agreement. There were some red lines for the design guidelines.
Can we go through those?
Yep, let's do it. So the very first
Oh,
page,
wait, hold on one second. City Planning Commission, do you have any other items in this document first before we move on that you want to talk to staff or developer about? Okay.
very first page, at the bottom of the page, there's a disclaimer just stating that the images are representative, right? That's not what is being promised in any way.
Thank you.
So I made sure they got that one in for you guys. Sorry, and the text on these is a little tinier, so it's gonna have to take some close watch by me. Page 6, the land use table. You'll see a change in some of those designations and uses with the different place types. And again, those were in response to some of the items that were brought up by the Planning Commission at the meeting on the 21st. Next page, page 7, with commercial retail, it just designates that some of the language in there. Page 9, again, in the place type section, number 3, 1.4.1.3 in the left-hand column, these uses shall only be permitted within a 1-mile radius of the regional park trailhead as shown on the land use plan. So those are the short-term rentals.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember that one. I like that one, actually.
So, going back to the, I'm sorry, we had discussed in our work meeting about the commercial center and how it's not shown anywhere on the master plan. So, how do the master plan is set, and how do they get the commercial center to be included without changing the entire MDA?
Can I punt to the developer on this one? Let them answer it for
We
you?
like the developer. You can come talk to us.
All right, if you've got that handy, if you flip to page 3 on the commercial center place type, so it's section 6, commercial center place type, number 3, location. It says that that can be utilized within any town center land use on the land use plan. So again, that's red. That's our red section on the land use plan. So that's where we're restricted to only allow a commercial center to be within those areas, but we're not specifically saying this is the place, because we may have more than one.
Sure.
We're most likely to only have one. Well, the main one's gonna be along the intersection of U111 and 126 South. I mean, that's gonna be the concentration, the highest traffic counts that we have is at that intersection. So that's the most logical place. But we wanted the ability to do some commercial uses potentially if the trailhead turned into something more, or if, I know it sounds crazy to some people, but if this road to Tooele ever did really happen, right? And we had a big road coming in, we'd be the first stop as you got through the canyon there. And so we've identified that area at the top by the trailhead as which again is kind of the last phase of development we get to, and we've kind of held that out saying, hey, we kind of view that as a resort, kind of a cool, fun area, a restaurant, some different things. But it could turn into something more if that road ever grew any legs, and I just don't know.
Right. And I have no problem with that ambiguity, because I think that's how communities grow.
Yeah.
You know, and things, that's perfect. I guess my question is, since we're not going to see this for the next 24 years, what's going to
That
prevent
hasn't been
you?
determined, thank you.
Oh, sorry. What prevents every town center type becoming CC?
I guess my question, I would turn that back to you, that would mean I'm removing my highest density uses. So would you be sad to see my apartments go and replaced with commercial uses?
I would be sad, because I think.
I would not.
Because I think that.
This is subjective.
This is, okay, fine, subjective, sure. Because, you know, towns are made up of different transects, and the top transect is your CC transect. You know, where you do have mixed use, residential above, you know, retail or commercial.
Sure.
I'm fine with that. I would prefer to see it located on the map and not doing the approach of, well, anywhere where we have a town center can be a commercial center. Because then what prevents the commercial center from taking over all the town centers? And it's a very different vibe, the commercial center and the town centers, right? That's why they're two separate types.
Yeah.
So,
You should be looking forward to the different dynamics on this body now.
Okay.
It's changed. So,
I'm sorry.
no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
So I just want to
That's
make
a good
sure
thing.
that as a city, that we are protected from getting all the town centers becoming CCs. And you'd enjoy that because there'd be less CC, high density.
I'm okay with it being CC, actually. So there's different views on this one.
Okay, if
Yeah,
you'd like to
more
make that
tax
as a
base.
recommendation,
Yeah.
then
I mean, if you can at least show like where those locations are going to be, like you said, you know, where those intersections are, just putting a designation, this could be a CC center, this could be a CC center, instead of all the TC or, I'm sorry,
No, you're
town
right.
center,
Town
yeah.
center,
And I think it'll get there, I think just not at this point. I think you will get to a point where this could be either or. And so.
Yeah, so I'm happy, we
Right.
can do that.
Right.
It becomes, it's still
Yeah.
not really any different because it's just kind of loose, right?
Yes.
But if you want me to do it
But
to
that's,
signal
that's
some
the
intent.
problem, is 24 years of loose.
Well, okay, but I'll come back, and I know you don't agree, but and I won't speak for the city. My guess is that generally the city would say, if you want to remove apartments and put in more commercial, we're not going to get in your way.
Yeah, the
So
tax
I-
base is very beneficial for overall community.
So, anyway,
Yes, yeah.
So if you wanna make a
I
recommendation-
think that we should at
Yeah.
least designate some areas, that way it's on the map.
Okay.
And that way it's not just left to, well, anywhere where there's town center, there could be CC.
Should I be the Adam advocate today on that one? But anyhow, some of the comments too are, we have almost too much commercial set aside, and we need to make sure that we're being smart about it, and hopefully, because they're not gonna leave a bunch of commercial area undeveloped and, where it's not gonna have that opportunity. So anyhow, I don't have a problem with just saying the town center, because
I
they're
believe
gonna be
this
smart.
area.
Yeah.
I believe this area will need some commercial.
It will,
with the amount
right, and
of
they're gonna-
residents
and
that
it's
will be
gonna happen.
located out there. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of how much will end up out there.
Right, exactly.
And demand will drive that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not as worried about that part.
Yep.
What item are we on, Chase?
Page 10,
Sorry.
No,
left-hand
you're
side,
good.
parking
You are
lot.
good.
Page 10, number 7, corner lots, no parking lots allowed on the corner. Section 8 does provide an exception. Section 8, number 1, corner lots. Corner lot shall not be used for parking structure with the exception of a parking structure, or I'm sorry, a corner lot shall not be used for a parking structure with the exception of a parking structure. We need to fix that language, but I think it is meant to say a parking lot with the exception of a parking structure or structures to serve a park and ride. That was the discussion with the planning commission?
Corner lot, yeah,
The corner lot?
yeah.
Yeah. A corner lot shall not be used for a parking structure with the exception of a parking structure or structures.
To service.
I mean, parking lot.
Means it can be used as
It's-
park and ride
It's
only.
redundant, but it makes sense.
Okay. What time is it? Where are we at, guys? Sorry.
Finish the sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't stop.
Right-hand column, accessory uses, you'll see the 2 changes there with regard to a parking lot and parking structures again, pretty much tracking the language that was identified previously. Sustainability, I don't believe we had any changes in that one. Section 3 was the street types and designs. Page 15, section 2, right-hand side of the column, last section, cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sacs should only be used when required to accommodate development within areas of steeper topography where through access is limited due to roadway access, spacing, or adjacent existing land ownership does not allow for a connection.
That's a forestism, right?
That is a
We'll come back to that one for us. Yeah, hold your breath on that.
I'll
one.
take it.
We'll be right back on that.
Can I ask real quick, because there was a sustainability and now we're on street. Did we pass the section about the continuous flow because we talked about the one trail? Did we pass that section?
That's
or
coming
did I
up.
miss-
No,
Okay,
that's coming up.
okay. For some reason, I thought we missed it.
Page 16, right-hand side, street types, you'll see the deletion of other specialty street types are encouraged to be used. And again, the graphics here illustrate the intent for a possible configuration of the street types.
Perfect.
Page 17, right-hand side, section 8, existing street network. Generally, major streets should be provided at half-mile spacing when feasible. Page 18, section 7, left-hand side, major streets include major local, minor, and major collectors and major arterials as shown on the master road plan.
Minor and? Minor.
That-
Sorry, it looks like a typo. Includes major, local, minor, add?
Yep, and major, it should say and.
And major,
Yep.
okay. Just one.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Page 19, you'll see some changes with regard to the cul-de-sac links on neighborhood and parks and open space sections, and then some of the provisions underneath the table description. And I think we're gonna take a break here and talk about some things, right? You wanna dive into
Sure.
it now?
Yeah, no, this is exactly,
I'm quiet now.
I know. So, I guess since the work meeting, we just kind of covered this, but I feel that the block sizes and lengths, and I had a few slides I put together. Do you guys have that by chance you can put up? Probably not? No. I guess we have it up here.
Was that emailed to Clint?
We can't throw it up. It wasn't.
Wasn't part of the.
Oh, it wasn't public record.
All right, that's good to know. All right, so, looking at block sizes, Salt Lake City has the largest blocks in the entire nation, average block size. 660 by 660 feet. That's the average size. And there's charts that show kind of where all the great walkable neighborhoods are. And I think that as a planning commission, the goal is to make this a great walkable community for the developer, for Herriman City, to really make this a great destination kind of place. And to do that, one element of that is block sizes. If we try and emulate Salt Lake City, we're going to run into some of the issues that Salt Lake City runs into, where those blocks were initially designed for agriculture in the center, and I know we're not planning on any agriculture in the center of any of our blocks, right? And all those blocks in Salt Lake City got subdivided, where the centers became other lots because they were too big when they weren't doing agriculture. So I wanted to recommend that I'm not recommending, I wanted to have us discuss this max block size. And what I suggest, in my opinion, is that our max block length does not go to the perfect size, which most urban designers say is 350 feet for a max length, but that we allow 400 for a town center, 400 for a village center, and 400 for a neighborhood. And having that 400 max length for a block, if you allow 400 on each side, that's 1,600 max perimeter. And what that does, that allows a lot more connectivity. It allows smaller blocks, which are more pedestrian friendly. It allows for more means of travel for both vehicular people, pedestrian, bicycles, and it creates a more unique and interesting experience on the road. And I think it's very valuable to keep those restrictions, especially if we're not going to see this for quite a while, or if it ever comes back to us. If we say in table 3.1 that the max block length is 800, and the max block perimeter, I think, was 2650. Is that right? 2640. There's nothing that staff can do or that the city can do to prevent the builder from doing all their blocks in the neighborhood, 1,000 by 1,000 or 800 by 800. So this 2640 is interesting because it's exactly 660, which is a Salt Lake City block on all four sides. And I don't think that we want that. Not here, not in Herriman, in a high-density area that's not going to be agricultural. Staying to 400 feet by 200 feet, or 300 feet for that matter, allows for double lots that are deep, and then you don't have to worry about, having these extremely long lots or subdividing them in the future with flag lots or, alleys going into new lots. So.
And I do have one thought with this, because I'm looking at, and it's cool that I visited some of these cities.
Yeah.
Because I look at Boston. Boston's about 550 feet, it looks like.
Yep.
And Boston's located right on the water, a lot of it, and it has large buildings, and it's a different feel. But the long walkways, because across the street is the water, and so it has a different feel than what we can have here. But I look at like Savannah, Georgia, New Orleans, and Durango, and Beaufort, South Carolina. Yes, I've been to Beaufort. is that they have a much shorter block lengths. And I don't think we need to go down 300 or below, but the difference in the fill is the connectivity, the walkability, the ability to have just a little different feel. It makes it to where you can get to whether you have commercial or parks or trails or very easily. There are dynamic ways of doing it where maybe you have some that is more of a path, a cobblestone path that goes through, and it's not really a road that goes through in a couple different intersection areas. You can make different feels for it and make it very unique and walkable, and make it a nice feel. So at first I was, because we've talked about this twice now, and then the first time we talked about it, I was like, I don't understand the difference. And so I had to research and look it up and figure it out and try to figure out what it really meant. And especially since something that is stressed in this development agreement is walkability, I do come to the same conclusion as Force that these long blocks does not promote a good walkable community. The sidewalks, a lot of what you have implemented into it does, and it does a good job with that part, but the length of it does limit that to some extent. And so I do have some agreements, and granted this would be recommendations to the city council, but a lot of what he's shared, I think, is right in line with how it would limit the ability to make this a good walkable community. Well, if you're going 1,000 feet down the road to turn a corner to get to a park versus going 400 feet down the road and turning through to get to a park, it is a big difference. And so there's just some of that feel, and then obviously I have some other things in some of my research talking about a little wider little bridges that may go over Midas Creek or the pathways or something. Wider bridges promote a better walkable area. Different paths that may have a different material like cobblestone or something like that that promotes something unique. Or as in Boston, you see a lot of the walkways going across the roads turn into a cobblestone or brick look, and it really slows down the traffic because they're like, that's where people walk. It changes with a high amount of traffic in a place like Boston. All of a sudden, everybody slows down when it looks like that's a place people walk. And so there's just some of that promotes a good, nice community and walkability. And so, but I'll let Forrest keep going. But that was some of the things that I noticed, and then just the ability to make it a unique and a way to connect to the different paths and trails and things like that with the shorter block lengths is something that actually makes a big difference as well.
Well, and I even think of like a smaller town that I really like is Carmel by the Sea. I don't know if anybody's been there. It's near Pebble Beach, but beautiful town. It has nice little blocks that have that same feel. And the commercial center downtown is amazing because you can, you go through each of these blocks, and it's one of the busiest commercial centers I've ever seen.
Right. Well, in the history of Herriman, you look at the original kind of plot of Herriman, and their old blocks were under 300 feet in all directions. And so this isn't something that's, I had slides that overlay, the Salt Lake City block over different cities. And it just kind of shows the proportion and how, like in Boston, you can fit almost 8 or 9 blocks within one Salt Lake City block. And I'm not saying that we turn this into Boston. That's not what I'm saying. There's a reason I didn't show Rome or New York City, because it's never going to be either of those two. But it can be something like Portland. Portland is like 200. That's even lower, I think. But Portland is the best walkable city in the nation for the last 10 years. And I think that if we can make this development closer to that ideal walkable town, it's going to be a huge draw. It's not going to be Daybreak. Daybreak has smaller blocks, but they also have kind of funky blocks. It has its own character. And it's not perfect. No development is perfect, but I think that if we can try and aim for a high standard, I think that's what's important. And I think this is a low-hanging fruit, that we can really just say typical block shouldn't be greater than 1,600 perimeter. And there's always, there is the section that says that if there's circumstances that it needs to be bigger, it can be, whether it's through topography or through, special needs, then there's a process to go through that, through the administrator.
So I would say that I like where you're going with this. I don't know how the other council members feel, but it might be a good time to get some input from.
Well, in line with the MDA, I do have a question that I'd like to get clarified. When it comes to roads, don't they subtract from the gross area of open space that's allowed, or in the calculation of open space?
Capital roads do. So like the backbone infrastructure that the city will own and maintain.
So
But
surface
private
streets.
roads do not?
Private roads, alleys.
And that was part of the definition that we included, right? The capital roads definition was part of that
Okay.
as well.
Yeah, all right, well, thank you, because the point was, if we have smaller blocks, therefore more roads, does that decrease the amount of open space that the MDA obligates the developer to? And if you're saying only capital roads, then all these surface roads shouldn't change the calculation?
Right.
Okay.
Lauren, Andy, any thoughts you want to share? It's okay if you don't.
No, I do. I think what's in here now is too large. I really do. Whether we go down to the recommendations that Forrest has, I don't know if that's right either. Maybe it's somewhere in between. But yeah, in comparison with Salt Lake City and the perimeter there, this is too much. I agree.
Hey guys, let's make sure we speak in the microphone. And I'm at fault too, turning my head and things like that, just so everybody can hear who might be listening, and for the recording.
Yeah, I'm with Andy. Yep, right with Andy.
I like the smaller lots, but I think we need to go into it with our eyes wide open. More asphalt means more maintenance, more infrastructure. All those will be added costs, not just to the developer, but long-term to the city.
Well, it's interesting too that, on the infrastructure aspect, smaller blocks actually decrease the infrastructure needs typically than larger blocks.
You mean as far as electrical?
As far as sewer, electrical,
Sewer, water.
water. Yeah, there's actually a decrease, and there's charts that actually show, something with large blocks versus small blocks. And I think they took a California town and two California towns, one with larger blocks, one with smaller blocks, and they actually compared the cost for the infrastructure and actually went down in the smaller blocks.
That could be for utilities, but it would not be for the roadway.
Yeah, not
Right,
costs.
right. You're going to have additional
You are going to have
roads,
additional
yes.
costs on roadways.
I think that's
Yes.
where your big long-term
Yeah.
maintenance is.
Because you don't have to chase your utilities on a further length as well. I could see that.
Yeah.
Right. Just like you're walking your utilities down the road. If
Yeah.
it was shorter, you would have that. But you do have a lot more. I think Darrell's point is well taken.
Yeah, I think Darryl.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I think, kind of get back to my point, I think what we've got here is probably too big, but maybe what Forrest was proposing was maybe too small, maybe somewhere in between, to get that balance.
So Chris,
So
would it?
maybe just
go
a recommendation then. This is one of those things that I talked about earlier, right? If we, rather than trying to pin down what the exact number is, just say, if you're making a motion tonight, advise the council that your recommendation is to consider block lengths somewhere in a range or to
Let's make
promote a
it
certain
objective.
ideal. Yeah.
Let's
something
make it, I think we probably need to be fairly specific, so it's objective.
Yeah.
And you could base it off of some of what you found there based off certain cities that have had high walkability scores. We found that this length is more typical to those that are conducive to
But
good walkable communities.
In the interest of collaboration, would it be worth inviting our developer to, if they have any comment?
Do you have any
on block
comments?
size?
You can sit there if you don't.
I knew he couldn't sit there.
Just be quiet. Yeah, I think just make a recommendation. I don't share your vision for small blocks. I understand the benefit to roads, but I think the upkeep and maintenance for, generally it's gonna be the HOA, because they're gonna have these narrow, private streets. The cities, what I envision happening is this. if the city really wants this, the city council is gonna say, we don't wanna maintain all these connector streets. It's just gonna be expensive, because snow removal, asphalt maintenance, I've listened to some of your asphalt meetings, which are intriguing, but the budget for asphalt and everything is pretty crazy. So I think what the council is gonna say is, yeah, we like this, but we don't wanna pay for it, so let's put it on the backs of the HOA. And then it's gonna make our HOA fee insane. I think that's probably one of the things I've heard as I've talked to people who live in Daybreak the most, is how big of a burden at times. There's some people that are fine with it. They knew what it was going in and can absorb as it gets increased consistently. But I think we were trying to do something a little bit different that would help keep some of those costs down. I know we've talked about affordable housing a ton, obviously. I think where we can, anyway, I could talk in circles on this with you all night. I don't agree. I don't want to be Boston. If I build Boston on the Hill, I've failed. You may love it. I don't. I love it. It's great for walkability when I want to go visit Boston, but I don't want to live in Boston. I don't think somebody that wants to live in Boston is the same buyer that lives in Herriman, Utah. I don't think it's the same person. So from a transportation standpoint, if you're just an engineer mindset looking at it, it makes total sense. But I don't think it makes a great community. It might make a great downtown city, but that's not what we're trying to do here. So you don't have minimum block lengths anywhere in your city, period. So we already view us being held to a way higher standard with what we're proposing, and you're trying to go like way tighter than that. So anyway, keep that in mind as you think about it. I think the cost and the burden on the residents, whether it's a city as a whole that has to take over ownership of all those roads or the HOA, is a factor that should be considered. So anyway, but I just say, make a recommendation. Those are just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I just have a little different vision.
Sure.
I don't want a grid.
Then I guess my question to you then is, what is your vision of a high-density Herriman? Because right now, this density level, it does not equate to Herriman, right? And this is what some of the conversations were before. So if your vision isn't a density level which Boston is less than what you're proposing, density-wise,
There's no way that's
per acre.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to know your vision. Like, how do you see this vision? Because, my vision is that we make this a great walkable neighborhood.
And I think a better way to look at it is, based off the MDA that we read and what was written in there, it talked about walkability. So it caused this body to look at what promotes a walkable community, and that's where a lot of these thoughts have came from. And based off the block length, that doesn't equate to a walkable community, though you're saying it's going to be a walkable community. So I guess we're trying to see, how are you saying it's going to be walkable when it's not on our research saying that it's walkable?
Well, I don't know. We're going to have to kind of hash through that.
Okay.
A street.
And I'm okay with that.
Well, a street's not the only way that people walk places.
Yeah.
And
Very
so
true.
we have provisions in there about pedestrian connections and things. And
Yep.
truthfully, I'd much rather send my kids not on every street. I live in a neighborhood that has all kinds of pedestrian pathways that cut through the blocks. I love that as a parent, not having to have to cross so many streets. So I think Daybreak's done a good job of doing both. When they really tighten up on their density, their blocks get smaller. And when they go into straight up single family where they're not mixing a lot of things, their blocks get larger. And that feels to me like a better community. Right. And I totally agree. When you're in a more commercial district or a more urban district, it wants to feel smaller, wants to feel taller, wants to feel more walkable. And as you branch out, it wants to spread out a little bit. Anyway, that's just a differing opinion, I guess.
Maybe a comment on this as well. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, the whole setup of the Salt Lake blocks and to have the center and that's not what he's gonna want, right? So his blocks that he sets up are gonna promote more frontage, more homes. So these are maximum, but I doubt he'll ever get to that to meet his goal as well for, the number of homes and things like that.
I agree with you 100,000%.
Yeah.
That is, his goal is not 800 by 800,
Right.
blocks.
Yeah.
But There's nothing here stopping him from doing that.
I don't know why he would, though.
It doesn't matter.
Well, and I
Because
think it's,
there's nothing in here that could stop him from doing it. There's
get
no one
that.
at the city that can stop him from doing it if it's in here.
but if, okay, it's getting back to the whole point, is the block size the issue, or is it, we need to make a recommendation for more walkability? I think he brought up a very good point about the roads and the blocks. There's another way we can promote walkability than just the block size.
You're right. And I think they do an excellent job in a lot away from when it
Well,
comes to
that's the 2 hour discussion I have.
Yeah.
Right, when it comes to the sidewalks, when it comes from keeping, parking lots away from the edges, I think you're 100% right. And I commend you guys for doing that aspect. This is the only area that I saw lacking in walkability. And so, I think,
I like what he said, though, is maybe for the different areas, we can, maybe we do go a little larger on some, but on others, we can go.
right.
And he, maybe he hasn't gone down enough on town center, but.
Town center and
commercial
village,
center.
maybe those
Yeah.
are the ones that need to be.
Yeah.
It's a difficult discussion. To me, I appreciate everything you've said, but as a smaller block promotes a grid, and I don't know if that's the look we want either, where maybe we can incorporate block breaks, a corridor, a walking corridor in between, every X amount of feet along a block.
Well, that's an interesting idea, and I've seen that done where you can have pedestrian pathways mid-block. And so if we were,
And I think it solves the same
So if we were
concern we
to-
have, to where it doesn't need necessarily be roads, but walkways that are located
alleys
different, or
or-
alleys, or something that
So what if-
promotes more walkability.
so what if we have a certain size, and then you can go larger than that if there's a mid-block walkway? If a mid-block walkway is provided, maybe we go with these smaller sizes that he's recommended, but they can go larger if mid-block walkway is provided.
And I think that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do we make it more walkable? Because right now, based off of some of the things we've looked at, it doesn't look like that's what it's doing. And so,
I think you made a good point, too. I think we're already holding them to a higher, Ryan and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, right? And but I think in this instance, nobody in the city's held to that standard like this at all. And they've done several developments in the area, and they've never come close to
but we've
that,
never
too.
we've never had a development with this type of density either.
Right.
And so I think it's sort of, the question is,
I'm just saying, I think we got to find a compromise, because if we're going to put a requirement on them, it's not on anybody else, I don't think we can be overly strict.
I'm thinking we go with
To the point, like walkability, we need to encourage more
It's
walkability
walkability.
somehow, and that's,
I
to me,
think we
that's
do
not
smaller
roadways.
blocks, but if they want to go with a larger block, a mid-block walkway can be substituted.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of the administrator's
I think that would
ability.
be a good recommendation.
Yeah. Next.
Good luck summarizing all
Chase,
this.
another item?
I'm gonna keep going. Next page, page 20, just cleaning up some of the verbiage with regard to designating alleys as private instead of just stating that they're alleys. And that's what you'll see with a lot of these changes in the design guidelines, is just cleaning up some of the minor.
I could be wrong, but that almost 20 through 33 is about that, just minor word changes. Yeah.
Page 21, the intent, you'll see some additional language there, and the typical lane application, again, just cleaning up cross references there. If you want, I'll just skip some of those minor ones and just go to the big ones. Are you comfortable with that?
I think my next page was 34, as I thought the rest of them looked pretty much the same.
I'm
It was
gonna,
like,
I'm gonna do that, just.
and
in
thank
the
you for
interest of
switching
time.
the drives to 20 feet.
You said 34, Chris?
I think 34 is the next one, parks, trails, and open space.
Yep, I'm just going through, making sure I didn't miss any, yep.
Yeah, these are all pretty,
I think they're all about the same. Let me know if we missed anything from the planning commission, but at least I think those were about the same.
I think you're right. I agree.
So this was one item of concern that we talked about at the meeting on the 21st, is some of the definitions of these qualifying land uses with regard to open space. There is, you'll just see there, some of the text that's been added, some that's been taken away to address some of those items that were brought up by the Planning Commission. I don't know if we want to take a break to discuss those still. You said you had questions about those, Chris?
So I have questions on restricted common areas for developments. What is this? in detail? I don't remember that one last time. Restricted common areas for developments. Well, I'm just trying to understand what that was.
This would be like privately owned common area, owned by, right.
Have we allowed private space that is not open to the public to be open space?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Landscape around commercial buildings? Have we allowed that before? Because that seems a little out of line, because I don't think a commercial property wants us to go on their land. Anyone?
At least I can maybe help, since we're the ones that made the changes. So a commercial project always has a landscape requirement. So the landscaping around the building
Yeah,
and your islands out in your parking lot, that is the only, like, you don't ever see a park in a retail center, right? So that is what you always get, is the landscaping around a commercial building. That's how they satisfy their
Open space requirement.
they do their own, they self-contain.
okay,
So yes, that's always done that way. What that
Okay.
used to say, instead of commercial, was private buildings. It was a typo. It was intended
Okay.
to say commercial.
all right. And then the farmer agricultural lands, just clarity on that one, because I think we talked about this in detail last time.
Yeah, the concern was that if it was just left to farm, that why does that count? And so what we did is we deleted the word farm. And then if you go to the definition section, we added a definition for what?
Page 60 has the definition.
Yeah, I won't read it to you, but there's a definition to clean that up.
Let me get to it.
So how does that differ from farm?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like a definition of a farm to me.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to go into detail on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I approve that, so
Yeah, same here.
I'll just leave it there.
On that one, weren't we gonna put something in there about it being like open to the public or dedicated to the public? Or am I missing a provision somewhere?
You have down below community gardens, which we're fine with that one. Institutional green space, which we have a definition on that. We're fine with that one. It was just farm or agricultural land. We didn't, and the definition still defines it as a farm, more or less.
Yeah, so if you go to page 35 on open space, it says that open space is defined as land preserved for the public's benefit. So we probably should tighten that up, because that's just a general statement.
Yeah, see, I look at a nature preserve as to the benefit, but agricultural land could still be a privately owned piece of property, and I don't know if I see that as an open space allowance. And then the stormwater for parks, stormwater for development, stormwater in common areas. And I just want to make sure that it's the same. I think there was some requirement on some, not upgrades, but like if there's something within that, whether it's a pavilion or something like that, is that still the case on this one? Or are these just, as long as there's stormwater for parks, stormwater for development with nothing else in it, we're looking at? Because I want to say there was a couple requirements for additions within that to allow that to be viewed as an open space.
So if you go to each of our park types, it requires a certain number of amenities to be in there.
Okay.
So-
I just know you added stormwater for parks. I wanted to make sure that still went with those.
And that's addressed on page 36.
Okay.
Yeah. Top of the left-hand column, stormwater in parks and open spaces. To be considered open space, stormwater retention facilities must at a minimum be engineered in
And
accordance.
so you're saying if underground storage is provided per the MDA, then it would be viewed. And I'm okay with that just because I know the substantial expense that comes with that.
So you like things that cost money?
I don't, but it takes away from the expense of the city.
Not our money.
It's a benefit to the community.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, did you say in section 4, open space, that you're going to redefine that definition? Open space is defined as land preserved for the public's benefit. Some of these items just don't feel like they're for the public's benefit when it's situated on private property or, you know, a commercial building. I don't know how you can say that's preserved, so I think maybe that definition needs to be updated.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I went through those adequately. I don't know if you guys have additional questions. I only have the one concern with them. The rest of them, I'm in the most part okay.
You want me to keep going then?
Unless the planning commission has additional questions.
Keep
going.
Page 35, with regard to parks, just referring back to the change in the quarter-mile requirement, stating that can be waived if the administrator allows it. And we've got language in the development agreement that we're really belts and suspenders right here, right? So,
We got your 10-acre minimum park right there, by the way. That was one of your
That's
suggested changes, where we can go to half mile if it's at least 10 acres.
I like it. I like it.
Keeps Wendy happy.
Okay.
Nope, it keeps me happy, and then I have to defend Wendy.
so Chris, this was the provision, same page, page 35, section 5 on the right-hand side, subsection 3. Generally, a connected street network should take priority over continuous trail system with the exception of the 6400 West Trail Corridor and the Butterfield Creek East to West Trail Corridor as shown on the trails plan.
And I'm happy with that. I think that provides at least one long trail that's a benefit to the community.
And I think we discussed last time, though, I think there will be culverts on that, like pedestrian accesses under the road to facilitate that.
Yeah, where we can't. The only one that we're worried about is just figuring out how to get under 6400 West with the power line corridor. We legally may not be able to do some of the things because of the easement restrictions that Rocky Mountain Power already has with their lines there. So we're probably limited on that one.
You guys are amazing. I know you can do anything.
You can get there.
Okay. I think it'd be cool though. I like it.
Again, a lot of these changes on 36 aren't big material ones. Develop stormwater detention facilities may count toward open space, required in section 4 when adequate underground storage is provided. And then the next section talks about the improvements to that.
I noticed they took dog parks out. Was there a reason?
Yeah, with the MS4 permit, I'm gonna let Jonathan talk.
I was just curious. That's more curiosity than anything else. We have an awesome dog park that's already planned, so.
Yeah, MS4 requirements just wouldn't allow that to be utilized in that fashion, so we just recommended to pull that out.
Okay.
Fair enough.
You're the boss.
So that's it for section 4 on open space. We jump next to page 42, site design. You'll see the setback table has some changes to that in red. I won't go through each one of those, but I'll give you a second to look at it and ask any questions.
Maybe just talk briefly about the 05 under town center.
Yeah, Eric, you want to take that one? Some things I'm just like, who's helping me with this one?
Yeah, Eric Langvart with Langvart Design Group. Yeah, so that was a conversation I think that we had with planning staff. Originally, we had 0 setback to the front porch and the front living in the town center for those rear load products. And I think the conversation was the reality that that's going to happen at that ground plane is very difficult, and to provide a porch or a stoop or something, but we still wanted to reserve the opportunity to bring an upper level cantilever out basically to the right of way, so that we could have best of both worlds, so that we're really right there at the street. The previous version of this one, the county, I think it had just contemplated 0. Actually, their setbacks were a little bit missing, I thought, and so we've expanded on that in a lot of areas. But all of that is pending approval from a public utility easement aspect, as we do run into that issue sometimes. So a lot of times we'll have to be 8 or 10 feet just because of that. But if we can avoid that, then we're showing 0 and 5. That makes sense.
I asked because I like 0.
Sorry, what was that?
I like 0, so that's why I was wondering why the 5.
So our conversations with the applicant have just been that when you have a 0 lot line, It doesn't create that space from public space to private space. You don't have it's just all kind of a deadline that all of a sudden you're going from a very private space to a very public space. So allowing that setback of 5 feet kind of gives you more of a, from public space to quasi-public into a very private space. And, in other developments that we've seen, or that I've seen, where you have a lot line that's right on the, or have a building that's right on right next to a sidewalk, and you've got windows and stuff there, and, pedestrians walking by can peek in, and it just, it kind of creates a little disconnect. So, and then allowing it above, I think that is completely appropriate, because you're not going to have that same kind of privacy issue, but, on the ground floor, providing that, and I think, as Eric said, providing that for, if there's accessibility issues or something like that, that gives a little bit more room to work that in as well.
Okay, but porches and balconies, are they allowed within at that 0 setback at ground level?
Yeah, that could probably be amended to allow those.
So if we allowed a porch on there, I think that'd be.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, just a livable area would be the setback on the ground floor.
So that's it for section 5 with material changes. Section 6, I don't know that we had a lot. Yeah, I don't think there was anything in section 6.
I think Jackson had a couple items
Oh,
to talk
did
about.
bring those
Wasn't
up.
that what you talked about in the meeting before? Is that 6?
Or 6.7.
Okay.
So back on setbacks, and so one of the things that I like about this is the setbacks. I think it's great with how it's working to activate the street, get all of the short and simple. Read all the words, or if I can actually hand them.
Yeah,
Just
I think
read
it'd be
it?
good.
Okay.
Be on public record.
So I'll start with the first one. It's actually clear back in section 1, but it ties back into this one here in section 6. And so mostly I'm focused on, or it applies to all buildings in some situations, but apartments more specifically in others. So in section 1.7, added a 0.5, made the note for town center, village, and neighborhood areas. Apartment surface parking lot shall not be provided within 30 feet of a front or street, side yard, property line of any property adjacent to a major or minor street. Apartment surface parking is not permitted within the first 6 feet of properties fronting private streets and must be separated from the street by a 6-foot wide berm that is a minimum of 24 inches in height. So the parking issue was really to reinforce the idea of putting buildings on the street, so you have that street front feel. And it really helps bring everything to the fore and help energize what's happening at the streetscape. And so that was the first piece to what I was looking at. And the second piece is here in 6.7, under doors, porches, and entrances. And so this would be town center, village, and neighborhood. And so this applies in most situations. Well, a little different with each sentence here, but a minimum of 1 pedestrian entrance to a public, institutional, commercial space, lobby, or ground level residential unit shall be provided for every 50 feet of building frontage along major local streets and 100 feet on minor local streets, and 100 feet on major local streets. So that way you get a lot of entrances going onto each of these streets. So where we have the major local streets, which have all the street parking, you've got entrances right there next to where all the street parking is. So the goal there was to add entrances, or encourage buildings to be right on the street front within the setbacks, but then have street parking and have that street parking correlate to all of those entrances from the buildings. So that happens in general at all spaces. And then a specific line I put in for the next was, residential properties must provide a minimum of 1 pedestrian entrance to a residential lobby or ground level residential unit for every 50 feet of non-arterial or collector street frontage. So anywhere that we have an apartment, so this one is specific to residential units. So anywhere that you have an apartment building, the apartment building is encouraged to have a street front, And then all the ground level units are encouraged to have their own entrances onto that street front so that they become part of the community right out their front door and within that setback that we just talked about. That is a little bit different with each of the areas. But that way apartments are part, or what you see, apartments and residences are walking right out their front door. They're walking wherever they go out as they hit the street and activate that streetscape. But then with that, cars that aren't part of the streetscape, aren't part of that street's parking, are relegated to the back. So that way that's why the paragraph in Chapter 1 correlates to this requirement for entries on the streetscapes. So it really works with the streets and the streetscapes in Section 3. So the goal was to really get that to work together with what's happening in Section 3 and really activate the streetscape. The last note I have is all properties with frontage on major or minor streets in the town center and village center zones must provide a pedestrian entrance that fronts the street. So that way, once again, it's just activating the street so that when you're in the village, when you're in the town center, you have to have an entrance from the streets. So that as people are walking on the streets and enjoying the streetscapes, that becomes part of what they're experiencing in the community. So that was a piece that I was looking to add, was this part about relegating parking behind the buildings, but then encouraging entrances onto the streetscapes. So that was an element I was looking at adding, would like to recommend be added to the design guidelines. So.
Ask on your recommendation?
Yep.
Will you just exclude a designated commercial center from that? I mean, obviously, if you have drive-throughs and stuff, you're not going to have, we don't want to introduce a door where people are trying to cross a drive-through.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, so at commercial centers, so when it's in commercial center, we take that piece out of the requirement. Okay.
Anyway, just a suggestion. Thank you.
No, that's a great one.
Sounds like that was kind of your intent anyway for this, is to do as much off the street as well, and it doesn't sound like you have any concerns in what he's, okay, good to know.
Next one that I
Oh,
identified.
I did have one
yeah.
more.
Keep going. Sorry, Jackson.
So that was my biggest thought, was whatever we can do to get activate the streets. One last one does relate to apartments again. This was on, and I'll just read the whole thing here. It's a little lengthy, but balconies consisting of a minimum area of 50 square feet shall be provided for a minimum of 50% of all non-single family residential units for buildings above 2 stories. Balconies may be inset into the building or may project into the street right-of-way a maximum of 5 feet, so long as 10 feet of vertical clearance is provided between the sidewalk and the balcony. Balconies facing a side or rear yard shall maintain a distance of at least 8 feet from the face of the balcony to the adjacent property line. Storage on balconies is limited to items such as tables, chairs, barbecue grills, and similar outdoor furniture. All new projects with residential units shall be required as a condition of approval to include language in their CC&Rs that restricts storage on balconies to acceptable items. So the thought was to, at apartment buildings, require half of them to have a balcony of at least 50 square feet. So I found, that just to get that outdoor space for upper level residences, and then to include that as much as possible. And you can even go over the streets where we've got our streetscapes. So that was one piece I would like to add for the apartments, was that we add some of that more outdoor space for the residents in the apartments. I don't know if there's any thoughts on balconies from the commission or not.
Just don't put air conditions on them.
Uh-oh.
I got a thought on the balcony. Josh was just talking to me about a project he did in another part of the valley. And are you considering these balconies that overhang to be cantilevered? Because we wouldn't want pillars coming down in.
If it's over, columns would not be allowed at a streetscape, but if you're behind a street, then.
It might just need to be clarified that they'd have to be cantilever if they extended into the right of way.
Okay.
So, okay.
I like that.
All right.
Should I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay,
If Jackson's done.
all right. I cut him off early last
it's a
time.
good
I
point.
apologize, Jackson.
I would say, yeah, that's what I wanted to
For
get.
that portion 6? Okay. All right. I think you can keep going.
Okay, I have only one more, and the next material items on page 55, just with regard to landscaping and landscaping requirements within islands. You'll just see the changes there in the different place types. The city, commercial center and the open space have a different requirement from the town center, village center, and the neighborhood place
What
types.
page was that, sorry?
55.
55. Okay.
55, I
Wasn't
apologize,
quite
yep.
there. Cool, great.
Drive 55.
And then just some minor ones for you to be aware of. There were some updates to definitions, again, just to make sure that there's some consistency between the way the wording is being used within the design guideline and how it's being described in the actual appendix of the design guidelines. Some items were taken out just because they weren't used. And takes us to the end of it.
All right. Disappointing. Lauren, what else do you have if we're not done yet? All right, guys, from the Planning Commission perspective, what additional discussion, questions, thoughts do we have on these items?
Do we want to do like they recommended, like Chase recommended, and kind of go one by one, starting on that end?
I was gonna say,
I
yes.
feel like we've gone through it unless you guys have.
But we need to list it, I think. Have you listed it there?
Maybe before we do
I've listed a lot of items.
yeah, let's go through the list.
Do you want me to go through what I have and you tell me what I missed? So at least from my perspective, I think there's 2 easy things that we can put. And one is recommendation of sharing to city council the items found on the document that Jackson printed out, which is pretty much the items in 6.1. It's a lot easier to just say, let's provide this document to them. And there's 2 changes in there where in number 2 would be exclude commercial centers.
Yep,
And then,
I've got it written on this one here.
and then item 3 being the cantilever.
Cantilever.
And I think it was those. And then I have another one that's recommendation to bring to attention the block lengths to the city council. And we could share what was printed out or brought as notes to the city council from Forrest. I also added in there from my perspective a recommendation of cobblestone brick or stamped walkways to provide a unique and better walkable communities, not everywhere, but select areas to define some of these, to slow down traffic, to just provide a different feel, and wider bridges for connections over some of the creeks or ravines or whatever when it connects paths. I don't think there's very many of those, but it provides a unique feel for it. I know item 6.1 with the MDA, waive the 1/4 mile of unique or larger open space. It is provided, which will allow a 1/2 mile extension if like larger parks or require at least or recommended larger if it's a unique space, open space or larger park, which would allow that 1/2 acre. I'm trying to think what else I'm missing. I mean, I have a couple more items on here, but it's not tied to those.
So I'm trying to like keep track of what some of the major bullet points.
Yeah, I'll go back through them.
So I can kind of, if you want me to go through my list of what I've kept track
Yeah,
of,
please
and then you
do.
can decide for what you want to keep, add to,
Yep.
change. So the first one I have here is work with staff to implement a more transparent public process than currently provided, including amending the IRC process.
I actually have, for my opinion, and it's just mine, I don't know what the rest of the planning commission thinks, but I personally recommend not implementing the IRC at all, but recommending sort of having a chart where there's certain items that just go to the planning commission And then there's certain items that city staff can approve.
I had an idea on that as well.
Yeah, I'd
I
like
was
to hear
thinking,
it.
what if there was a method set up where an elected official, whether that be somebody from the council or mayor or whoever, if they want, they can veto the IRC and implement a planning commission process. So on a particular subject, if something is contentious within the IRC between the city, they can trigger a process that then goes back to planning commission. So that way everything's essentially handled by staff, all the little stuff handled by staff. If there's ever something that's a larger concern, that elected official could pull a veto and then then it goes to commission and council.
What's the thoughts from the planning commission? I'll tell you, there's two very different views on this one. Because I just question having it at all because of transparency reasons, but I do think there is a large list of items that never need to come back to us. I do believe that.
You're saying that for example, the mayor would be the trigger.
Right. If something was large
his
enough.
opinion, if he doesn't like
Right.
it, he axes it and it goes to P&Z.
Right, then it would trigger a process where they wouldn't make a decision, but it would trigger as a veto. It could go back to P&Z and then council if there was a large enough concern. That way that there's always an opportunity for public say if something's a big enough issue.
Yeah, I mean, I like it, but I don't know how
But
fair
then-
that is. Right.
I don't know.
Does that become too subjective? That's the magic word for today. Objective, subjective.
I don't know, what do you think, Chase?
I think I'll let you guys make your recommendation to the city.
He's out now.
Oh, he
Done.
punted that one.
Well,
Bruce punted that one.
So Bruce brought up a good point. This is a policy decision, right? This is what you think you should recommend to the council and ultimately what the council thinks will be best from a policy perspective for the city and for this development.
And at least my perspective is, I think it cuts out too much transparency by having the IRC. That's why I recommend not having it. But I do understand that there could be a huge benefit to it as well. I just don't like, and maybe because I've been on here too long, but seeing the changes over the last 7 years of trying to provide a more transparent process. And that's where I struggle with this.
Of the same
And maybe
frame
then,
of mind.
Chris, from your viewpoint then, because it's not how we view an open policy should be, it's better to cut it out than try to compromise it? I'm thinking that if you had a matrix set up, even with the IRC, where you had a staff level, an IRC level, and a P&Z level, we don't need to be involved with serpentine sidewalk or straight sidewalk or shape of curb and gutter. That staff can deal with that. IRC, in my mind, should be working with staff to seek, working towards approval of their development by working with staff to satisfy staff's concerns. And then any deviation or change in the MDA has to come to P&Z.
See, but the one thought with that is I believe city staff can handle a lot of that anyway.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why we implement IRC.
A lot of it, but not all of it.
Well,
And then I think there are items that should go to, whether you want to call it an IRC or the planning commission. I just view that the IRC is not the right route.
Well, it sounded like to me that the IRC was helping support the workload of the city staff. If they can help facilitate
Am I
some of
wrong
that
to say
and-
you'll still have to look at all of these items before it goes to the IRC?
It's more of a QA than a QC, right? It's
Yeah,
more they-
we'll still have to look at everything. I mean, like I said, the one thing that will
Yeah.
save us is just the time in preparing staff reports and presentations and.
But I think there's a large amount of these items that I believe staff can just approve.
I agree.
And that's why I'm saying it wouldn't even need to go to an IRC or to the planning commission if we can make a chart that defines what those are. And then I believe there are some that are big enough that need to be transparent to the community and need to be shown.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my view is I don't want to lengthen the process. I believe we can shorten it.
Do you have an idea of what items you think should be?
If you gave me a list, I could probably check off which ones, but off the top of my head and just trying to think of them all, probably not. So if you were to say, here's the 25 items that typically would need to go to a body like this, there's probably 15 to 20 of them that could go just to
I mean,
city
we
staff.
could do that right now. There's not that many in my
Yeah,
mind. I think
yeah,
it's
I
very
mean, I'm
fair.
okay with that, but that's assuming the planning commission views this as a good way to go or not. And so I don't want to go through that and put them through it if the planning commission is sitting here and I'm the only one that says I don't like the IRC.
My only thought, there's been a lot of thought in this IRC, right? You guys have been hashing this out for a while. Is that something everybody's beholden to, or are you okay to just scrap that as a possibility to maybe find a different way to streamline this
And
situation?
see, I just view city staff as being probably the equivalent to the IRC in majority of the items. And it's like, why would we, they look through it, they go through it, and now they have to go to an IRC when there's always a list of items that I sit here when a developer comes back and I'm like, why are we looking at this?
Sure. And that's
so-
exactly what we were trying to.
And I don't think it's gonna be any different taking it to the IRC. They're gonna say, why am I looking at this?
Well, and that's I guess
They
my
just don't have
question
to
as
wait till
well.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Is the IRC going to save time for the staff?
Well, I don't.
there
think-
is, then,
The staff still has to go through regardless, correct?
Well, they are, but it's to a lesser extent, right? You still have to.
You still have to
That's my
prepare for
question.
the IRC.
That's what I'm questioning.
Is that right?
No, we won't be doing presentations and
Well, not in a
reports.
presentation, mind, but you still have to go through it all to.
We'll be doing we'll be looking through, ideally, I think that the idea is the IRC reviews it, they submit it to city staff saying, we reviewed this and approved it, then we review it. If there's any, at that point, if there's any, anything that conflicts in our opinion, then it goes through that review process that Chase was talking about, where we go through a dispute process and figure out how to resolve it.
So that's the issue there, is that it's not that you guys are reviewing it first and then it's going to the IRC. The IRC is coming up with their suggestion, you review it, and if you have any problems with it at all, it goes to an outside group that decides the fate of that issue.
Is that the process? Is that the process that it would be seen in? Is IRC to you guys and then determine if it goes to outside mediator, for no better words?
If there's a dispute.
Yeah.
So, and I was going to call Blake up and put him on the spot because he wasn't here when
Do it, Blake.
when he initially discussed this, but he, as the community development director, who's over all of these departments, right, I think can add some additional insight.
Sorry I was late. I was driving through 400-foot blocks for 45 minutes to get through traffic signals in Provo. So as I envision this IRC process, I believe that as the plan comes in and as I'm part of the IRC, we're going through all the staff meetings and talking about, hey, this project's coming in, here's how it works, just like a DRC process would work. And then I'm going to IRC prepared with all of the staff's comments from parks and planning and public works, engineering, the whole group, coming and bringing that to the IRC and saying, these are the issues, or, hey, we're good with it, let's go. And so after it goes to IRC, the subdivision will still have to go through the full engineering review process. Nothing gets missed there. So to answer the question, will it save time? It'll save the planning commission prep time that is sometimes pretty significant. But other than that, it's all the same process behind the scenes. It's just like Ryan said.
Is it worth going through the items then with Chase to say?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah, if there's a way, no, I agree. If it still has to go through the same process.
I have a lot of faith in the city staff. I don't think the list of what I feel like needs to go back to planning commission is as long as maybe other individuals in this room think it might be.
I agree. I want to empower the city staff to make decisions.
So we
Let's give them the.
I did.
Are we going away from the IRC then? Is that where I hear us?
I
That's a
personally don't like
recommendation
the
right
idea of it.
I guess I'm confused because at the beginning we were talking about having city council on it to give some more feedback from
No,
some
that the
elect-
city council would be the ones that chose it if we ended up going this route.
They help select the.
They would help
members.
select who was on the IRC.
members on
That
the
was
IRC.
it.
But the problem is that there's no public input.
No city council would be on the IRC.
So
They would
where's
help
public
select.
input come in here? We go back to the public input. Where does that?
That's what we're
just-
going to discuss now is
just
what
when it
can
goes
we.
back to-
Which
just when it
items
goes
need to
back to
come back to where
BCs.
the public would be able to see?
Yeah.
So,
Like a subdivision versus a conditional use, those kinds of things, right?
yeah. Because to be perfectly honest, once the architectural guidelines are placed, I'm not sure I need to see all those.
Absolutely, right.
I just don't. I believe you guys could be,
We have great staff that can look at all those
I
items.
agree with that.
That have to look at it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and so, well, let's go through the list. You said it wasn't that long.
I'll keep track.
I honestly have a lot more faith in this, in the staff.
And this is
and
something we've
so-
talked about with the developers, so they can chime in if I miss anything.
Yes, please do, guys. And if you want to come up, you can. I really want to make this process easier is what I'm hoping to do.
And maybe
And granted,
cheaper.
this is just a recommendation, but
Yeah. Go. They're having their own sidebar.
Single family. Single family site plan. Subdivision.
I think the subdivision does need to come back for the planning commission to look at originally. I think that's something that has to be transparent to the community, and in this meeting, it'll allow that.
Multifamily.
I think it's
that one comes up.
I think it's the same thing.
Conditional uses.
Conditional use, right?
State statute doesn't require that come back to a planning commission and that you hold a public hearing on it.
Okay. We'd have to adopt objective standards for that as well.
We've identified some deficiencies in our current code.
The only conditional uses that I worry about is the home occupation. Thank you. Because that seems to be the biggest problem with the outcry of the community. Most of those I don't think are, honestly, I think you guys can handle fine, most of them. That's the one that seems to be the biggest problem from a community perspective.
Bruce, what else did we talk about? Mixed use, commercial. Yeah.
Mixed use and what? Sorry. And commercial? Okay, I thought you said a different one. Okay, my apologies.
And just to clarify, what parts of, because when you say multifamily and mixed use, what parts of this? Because there's parts of the multifamily that don't need to come back in.
Site plan would not, you're right, a site plan.
Yeah, site plan.
Yeah,
Site plan, but not designs, right?
yeah,
That
the
kind of
design
what we're thinking.
standards. I don't
Sounds like
think
the only thing that would come back, or what you're maybe discussing is coming back, would just be a subdivision.
Would be subdivision, multifamily site plan, and mixed use or mixed occupancy site plan, and
Because I
commercial.
think it's the layout of what's coming back, what's coming to the community is what needs to be seen.
So site plans in general, you want to come back to the commission? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, we're talking about multifamily mixed use subdivision, right?
But that's-
Well, in general,
that's
all,
Yeah.
different, right? What? That's different though, right?
What's that?
Site plan versus a subdivision?
Right.
Right. So that's what we're trying to.
But
I don't
the
know if we went-
subdivision lays out, yeah,
Property.
I just think subdivision.
yeah,
I don't
Think-
think it's necessarily site plan.
yeah, I think that'd be okay.
Site plans go through
I
staff.
don't remember the last time we denied a site plan other than.
No, I don't remember either. Usually the site plan just follows after the subdivision, because the subdivision after that
There
point
was-
is pretty much done. Thoughts?
Yes.
Well, Lauren was just saying we haven't denied a site plan. There was the one that took quite a bit of, down by the community college, that they tried to do a different site plan than what they had initially brought
Well, they
in,
brought one and then they changed it.
because it didn't match their initial one.
Yeah, they changed one completely from what they originally brought in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say site plans.
I'm just sitting here and trying to think what we're cutting out at this point.
The design review is
Right
what's
now,
cut out.
It's all the design reviews.
For planning commission review, I have subdivision, conditional use for home occupation.
All
and
other conditional uses will go through you,
All of the conditional uses, except for home occupations. are
except for
going
home
through.
occupation.
Right, so just those two items for for planning commission review? And then, so I've got single family, mixed use and commercial site plans, and and most conditional uses, those would all be staff approval.
The only one that I'm thinking may need to come back, which is just for transparency and awareness, is the commercial stuff. Because those usually go through very quickly, but I think that tends to be something
A
that,
commercial site plan, maybe?
yeah,
Commercial site plan you're asking to come
yeah.
back.
Yeah, just
Just the
because
commercial
typically
side plan.
community, all of a sudden there's homes and then there's a commercial one going next door. It seems to be ones they tend to be, want to be more aware of.
What about like a vertical mixed-use site plan?
I think if it's zoned as that, I don't know if it's going to be
Covered by
crazy.
standards, isn't it?
What's that?
It's governed by standards, isn't it? Vertical.
It's, I mean, it's governed by the.
Well, it'd be part of the mixed-use
Yeah.
site plan.
Yeah, by the
Yeah.
NDA.
Yeah,
I don't think we have.
I don't know if I'm as concerned with that one.
Just a
It's
straight
more when you get,
commercial site.
all of a sudden there's a warehouse going next to 100 homes. Something
Your
like that.
idea is just not to blindside the public.
Yeah, it's really which ones do the public, do they most often want to hear from, I guess, or hear about?
Okay, so amended motion here. Work with staff to implement more transparent public process than currently provided, including amending the IRC process with the following options. A, remove IRC, identify items for planning commission and staff review. Staff review items are subdivision, conditional use for home occupation, or I'm sorry, this is planning commission review, subdivision, conditional use for home occupation, and commercial site plan, and then staff review, single-family and multifamily mixed-use site plans. And
I
most
think-
conditional use.
I think single family by staff, but I think multifamily and mixed use by commission, site reviews. So a site plan would be reviewed by planning commission, or if it was multifamily or mixed use.
You want that, you want to add those to the site, you want to?
Yeah.
Is that the consensus? I've heard otherwise, so I just want to make sure.
I'm okay either way on that.
I think they're a big enough deal that
Yeah.
it should
I
be in
think
there.
it becomes something that the community tends to want to look at, especially when there's homes that are next door now. Andy?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, with that recommendation.
You want it in, you want to see multifamily?
Yeah.
Site plan?
I think so.
Okay. So are we comfortable with that motion as it is?
What else did you have on your
Move on to
list?
the next?
Yeah, move on to your next, yeah.
Okay. So this is really easy. Add language to identify unique open space in 6.2.1. That was, I think, from Chris.
Is that, okay, there were two areas, if that's the open space on page, I put 34, page 34, is that what that one is?
Yeah.
So I disagree with having agricultural lands on there. I don't think that should be on the item as approved open space. And really, that's the only one that, everything else that they had on that list, I'm comfortable with.
I would like the definition of open space changed, so it's not just land restricted for the public use, it can be private also. Right now, the header, I think, on section 4, is it, an open space? Puts a restriction on it.
Yeah, really, the farm/agricultural land based off the definition found in this, I don't agree with it as open space. But that was the only item.
Just a procedural recommendation, as you bring up an item, get a consensus on that item. It's just easier as we make this recommendation to the city council that we can say, there's a consensus from the city council on this
city planning.
particular item.
From the planning commission.
What is the thoughts on that one?
On agricultural
open
lands.
space, yeah.
Open space and agricultural lands. Obviously, I'd like more. So your thoughts
love,
are,
But see,
because there's going to be a good chunk of agricultural lands associated with the university. Right? Is that what you're
The
getting at?
university is different because
Okay.
institutional land is on there. And that's different. That's institutional land. If they're using it for agriculture, it's still institutional land. Because that's USU.
And so institutional land is not a part of the open space anyway.
You're allowed to have institutional
Institutional
land
green
if
space.
it's programmable and the city is allowed to use
Signs
it.
Subject
signs
to us
across.
entering into an agreement
Correct.
with regard to that land.
And so that's why
Okay.
institutional land I don't consider.
Okay.
I'm okay with that one.
And agricultural, to me, you're not going to get public use or private use.
Yep.
As far as an open space, so I don't think
Yep.
it should be.
That's where my.
And how much are you going to
my
have
problem
then
is.
really of that anyway?
There may be none.
No, I know,
There
but
may
I
be
agree,
none.
so I'm agreeing with what you're
Yeah.
getting at here.
Yeah.
So I agree.
So,
I agree as well.
Any disagreements
I'll agree.
on the agricultural?
Okay, consensus.
Okay, there you go.
Next one, amend
Doesn't
open
happen.
space definition to allow private land as well.
Say it again?
Amend open space definition to allow private land as well.
Let me find that. I think it was the top of
It was
section 4.
Yeah, where was that?
I think it was to eliminate the term.
Well,
Just the term, yeah.
technically, the commercial land is private and it's allowing the open space around it. So by definition, we have to change
It's
it.
more contradictory.
Correct?
It's more contradictory.
Yeah, yeah, I think he's saying we have to change it because there are areas that say private land can be open space already.
Okay.
So I think we have to change
It was
that.
in contradiction.
Yeah, and that's just a drafting inconsistency on
Yeah.
our part. Because we are allowing, like HOA private parks to be counted towards open.
Not yet.
No, we haven't got there yet, but he's going through
Swimming
the list.
pools and whatnot.
Swimming pools,
Yeah,
right.
that type of stuff. Yeah. So,
Okay, so the next one I have here is designate or limit areas for community commercial to happen. That was from Commissioner Sickle. I don't know if there's consensus on that or
Is
not.
it limit?
No, it's designate.
It's not limit, it's to designate,
It's just
right?
to designate
Yeah.
areas where that would be.
I'm okay with how they have it written, that these are areas that could be either or. I don't
I don't
agree
wanna
with that
tie their
one.
hands to
I don't
it
want to
either.
tie their hands on that one or limit them.
Because it could change, could,
Yeah,
as the.
because
to their
realistically, the
point,
commercial will help with the tax dollar base, and so if they change it to commercial, I'm okay with it. I don't think they need to designate it because I don't think they can at this point.
I know what you're saying, and I get the intent, Forrest, I know what
Yeah.
you're saying, but I think they can, there
I'm
could be
just-
a lot changed.
right,
in
I'm
the
just
center
trying
of
to
the valley that they
clarify
wanna
so
be
that-
Flexible.
You know,
But the commercial, what we're saying, it can only happen in the town center, right?
So I'm not hearing consensus on that one.
No, I think you're not. But
you
I
can
think
cross
the
that one off.
consensus is leave it alone,
Okay.
right?
All right, the next one I have here is reducing the block sizes to promote walkability as proposed by Commissioner Sickle and/or, these are a couple of things I heard, possibly allowing larger lots or larger blocks if transected by pedestrian paths, or consider areas to require alternative pedestrian path materials, or and, I guess.
The only thing that I would add to that, and you guys tell me your thoughts, is approximately between 400 and 600 feet, adding those additional
I
walkway or
would go
paths.
down to 400.
400, you think?
Yeah, 600 is just
Okay,
too big.
400 feet.
So 400, but if they go above
But it
that,
could still
then-
be
Yeah.
1,000 foot, but there's a walkway or a pathway that goes through at 400 feet.
Yeah, I
Right.
So
think
there's
Encouraging
intermittent.
walkability.
and there's
Yeah, I
the
think we
approval
need to-
process for that through the administrator.
you look at a lot of the rural communities out in our state, right? They're a twelfth of a mile block, right? 440. So, yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so I think if we go 400, 440.
But yeah, and again,
That's better.
I agree with the comment that was made too. We don't want to tie their hands to a standard that,
We don't require.
that we don't
anywhere
require
else.
anywhere else.
And,
So let's
and the-
require it other places.
Well, and maybe that's true. But for the most part, I guess, I don't know, I don't have a lot of concerns with the way some of these, I think we've got a really good trail system within our community, and it helps promote the walkability. I love the cul-de-sac I live on, so I'm okay with it. There's not a lot of pedestrians in my cul-de-sac and things like that. But anyhow, I guess my
Yeah.
point is I think we've got a pretty good product
The
going so
the
far
only
from a
other
walkability standpoint.
recommendation for them to look at is in the apartment, town center, or village centers, applying something that makes it visible that it's walkways such as cobblestone brick or stamped walkways, just to sort of have a breakup and have a more of a walkable feel. And then also just wider bridges with connections to walkways and stuff, or the paths. Because everything I've seen and everything I studied was these wider bridges encourage and promote a cleaner feel as you're crossing between bikers and runners and everything else that could.
So I think the main thing is we want to promote a lot of good walkability here, and those are some examples. kind of
Yeah.
like we talked about. The overall thing is, let's make it walkable.
Yeah, not
Here's
making
some
the
options
bridges
to
that
help
are
us
very
achieve
thin,
that.
yeah.
So I'll read this back to you. You guys can say yea or nay here. So reducing the block sizes to promote walkability is proposed by Commissioner Sickle and/or possibly allow larger blocks if transected by pedestrian path, which creates a 400-foot path, 400-foot, 400-foot
Spacing, separation.
Implemented every 400 feet or so.
Yeah.
spacing. And then consider areas in the village center, commercial to require alternative pedestrian path materials, including wider bridge connections.
Good.
I'm good with that.
Any questions? Okay. Next.
And then the last one I have is just adopting the language that Jackson's presented tonight, excluding commercial centers and then cantilevers.
Cantilever balconies,
Yeah,
yeah.
not allowing the pillars on the cantilevers. or
I think
on-
it's
on
probably
balconies.
Cantilevers
good.
into public space.
I think it's probably good to provide the notes that he provided
Yeah.
for us.
He did
as
read
well
that
with
into the record, so you
Oh,
can
okay.
refer back to that.
Okay, but I think probably a printout of this one is provided would be appropriate.
With those edits that he
Presented that
just
way to
mentioned.
council.
Yeah.
I do have one more item, item 6.1, where it talked about the quarter mile and the half mile, and allowing it to increase to a half mile if it's a unique or larger park associated with it. We did have somewhere else in the document where it talked about a 10-acre park, and so that obviously would allow it to expand to a half mile. Just maybe some clarity on that one, with the recommendation to the city council to look at clarifying how and when that's appropriate. Does that help, Clint? Everybody look at that, okay?
But now the IRC's gone,
Yes.
so it doesn't matter, so here, let's come to us.
So allow increases in distance from park to half mile if park is considered unique.
Unique, or larger park.
I think it was large.
Well,
It
you already
wasn't-
had
it wasn't
10 acre in
unique.
there.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, if we had an indoor facility that was tennis courts or pickleball or,
Yeah.
Wendy left already,
So 10 acres in size or unique is
or
kind of what you're,
unique, yeah.
yeah. You've already got the 10 acres, so just add
Yeah.
unique.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring this one up just because I have to. But this is a recommendation, not a requirement to the city council. Just recommendation that in some of the areas with apartments, town center, village centers, recommend them looking into and encouraging underground parking to provide a better fill.
I should have known you were going
It's a
there.
recommendation, not a requirement. And I know different builders will say no. And the last thing, which I think is a disservice if we don't say this based on it, and it's going to be my opinion, but we'll see what the rest of the planning commission is just a recommendation in decreasing the number of units that are allowed in this development.
Boy, I'm glad you opened the can of worms
So
before I did.
I figured I'd end it with that one. And it is just a recommendation that there are more units than are needed in this development, and to recommend the city council looking at decreasing it. And I don't know the rest of this body if they agree or disagree with that.
I think that's, I'm not trying to bash anybody here, but I think that's one thing, and I look in the report right here, and it says, while not an exhaustive list of items covered by the MDA, the following were discussed by PC and are incorporated in the current draft. First, right out of the gate, number of residential units, 6,330. I don't believe we've hashed that out at all as a planning commission.
We
At
have
all.
not.
It kind of just got mentioned, that's what they've got approved, that's what they're coming in.
That's why I brought it up here.
My take, and I'm just gonna say, this is my opinion. We go back years to when we started discussing this development. Our general plan for years in this annexation area showed 3
I think it was 3.4, but yes.
units per
Something
acre.
like that. Units per acre.
Master plan could go up to 5. And that was in the county as well. That was the county said it could go up to 5 units per acre if it was a master plan community, which it is, great. So then that's where I can get to. I can get to 5 units an acre, which is 4,650. To me, to now go above that even more to close to 7, I want to see us get something back as a city. I appreciate the thought of a trailhead. I appreciate it. I get it. I think that's a huge win. But to me, honestly, a trailhead and one 10-acre park and 900 acres, I'm not getting enough out of this to go above and beyond a general plan. I'm not. If you talk to people in the community, people aren't against necessarily high-density housing. It's that there's no benefit to our high-density housing. Usually the benefit to high-density housing is more open space, more amenities, more, that's why you give high density, you can share those spaces amongst more people. I don't think we're getting that here. I think right now what we're seeing is housing.
There's even benefits if, for instance, and I'll say the park, the 40-acre park that SLR is going to bring in, there's benefits if even areas next to them can help with those, and whether that's water rights or just a different type of connectivity, different amenities. I mean, there has to be overwhelming benefits for what is happening. And I agree with Lauren that this is high density. I don't think the city's scared of the density. They're scared of what is it bringing to the community. And I think that's the question that we keep thinking about. It's like, okay, we're bringing a trailhead, but we're not bringing the trails, the county is. And so, okay, so we're not bringing the trails. The trails are going to be there no matter what. And a 10-acre park, I think that's a little bit of the concern, and I think that in the recommendation needs to be made is, are we receiving enough benefit for the amount of density that's being asked for as a city? And it needs to be considered in decreasing that unless we feel like there's something coming to the city that's of overwhelming benefit. And when I say that, it's like, are our citizens going to say, this is a great community where there's things to do and it's a great place to be? And I don't know if the answer is yes. So that's why I opened up that one at the end.
So I've included that as a condition of approval. It sounds like there's consensus.
A recommended decrease.
There is for me.
Yeah.
It's not for me.
No?
Nope.
This, for the last item? I think the ship sailed.
Well, the ship sailed.
The ships.
So I don't
The ship
think-
sailed, so.
I think we're getting more than just, a 10-acre park. I think this could be a great, great community asset. I think that this could be a draw, and it's not what Herriman has right now. Herriman has a lot of suburban sprawl, a lot. We have plenty of suburban sprawl. And I think that there's a desire and a need for this type of density that will allow more open space in Herriman.
But what do you mean by open space? They're meeting the minimum requirement.
They're meeting the minimum requirement, but if you look at Herriman as a whole, you're gonna be able to get a lot more residents in that area and not have to subdivide a lot of other areas to accommodate.
But this can't have an impact on the other areas. It doesn't have an impact on the other areas.
It will, though. If it's a draw, it's gonna have an impact.
Because if they come or annex into the city or change, they're going to have their own master development agreement, their own requirements. And,
It's true.
And the land value increases so much when you have higher density that the probability of having anything in lower density goes away.
I understand, but I think that it's going to be a beneficial thing for the city, and I think that, the ship has sailed on that as well.
Right. For me, it's pretty simple. You're going to get 345 acres of apartments and 588 acres of everything else. So 345 acres of apartments is just a lot in my mind. But I agree, it's already passed us. And
Right. Well, I don't see it just as apartments and then other. I see it as.
37% of it is apartments.
Right, but apartments aren't just apartment buildings. They could be mixed use
It's not 37% of the land, it's 37%
of the units.
Of the, yeah, and you have, so you have single family, you have everything else, the mixed use in the remaining 30%, 63%.
Yeah, and I can say that, I've not been happy with the fact that, the project went through the county trying to avoid us as long as they could. But it's where it's at now. So I think,
But my take, and I'm
but
not.
I think adding a comment that we're still upset about it isn't going to help us in a future working relationship.
And I'm not saying I'm to be clear, I think you can convince me to get to 6,300 units. I'm not saying that. but I just want to see something in this that's a benefit. Full disclosure, I work in sports for a living. I work in sports. You look out here, there's going to be, I just ran some numbers while we're sitting here. I'm guessing 20,000 people in this development.
30,000 is the number.
20 to
I've-
30,000.
30,000.
How many kids are going to be, how many young kids are going to be in this?
Some of
Well,
them
we're
all.
three units per, or three units per home.
Hopefully. And Herriman tends to be more than that. Herriman, you know,
We're
you
closer
see
to
the 3
4.
to 4.
And so
Already
half of
you-
them are kids.
And one thing I really liked up front was the talk about
And
trying to keep them
we
in
already don't
the
have
area.
programmable space
There's
that,
nowhere, we talk about our kids that are leaving the area.
we go to other cities
We go
now.
to other cities to play sports. And that's just one issue. But if we're going to build this high-density housing and allow all these people to come, you've got to provide all the services. And I know parks are expensive, or water, we're trying to be water. I'm not saying they have to solve it all in this situation, but to have nothing of that. Nothing of, that's just one thing. That's just one. It's just, that's my struggle. Is if, honestly, I'd rather have more density around a 50-acre park with programmable space. That's where I'm at. So I'm not saying.
Yeah, there's a real famous
To a
park in
degree,
New
yes,
York
the
that
ship
did
has
that.
sailed to a degree probably on the number of units, on the,
Real famous park in New York that did that.
I'm not saying, I don't think there's any of us that would stand up here and, we don't want this development in the city right now. That's not the point. But I think.
Okay.
I just want the
I'm not
citizens
angry.
to
I'm
look
not
at it and
angry. I mean,
say,
I don't think
we
anybody's
like it, we
angry
want it
anymore.
here too.
I'm not angry anymore.
That's it.
They did what they had to do to go to they're business people, honestly.
Yeah.
If any of us were in their shoes, we'd done the same thing, but just, even to sell this to residents that we're gonna bring 6,300 homes on 900 acres, what's the rest of the city gonna benefit from this development? And that's just,
What's
that's my take.
What's this development going to benefit from this development?
Right, that
What
too.
amenities does this development bring its own new citizens, I guess? And so I guess there's some of that question.
And that to me, I guess that's my struggle, and I didn't bring this up in the meeting before. That's my struggle with moving on tonight. I think that's the biggest issue, and we've kind of avoided that topic up to this point.
And remind me, I don't typically do this, but I can make a motion, right?
As the chair?
You're gonna, as the chair? I'm trying to remember.
If you're a voting member, you can.
Well, I'm not a voting member,
Then no, you cannot.
but I'm pretty sure that they told me I could make one. Yeah, because I don't typically do it, but I would be okay with, or wanting to do this. Because the only other thing on the number 9, decrease the number of units allowed in the overall development or bring a substantial benefit to the community from larger park, something that would be unique to this area that's a larger benefit to warrant the amount of density that they're asking for. I guess that's the only, because it's a recommendation to the city, I guess that's how I would look at it. Because I agree with Lauren, I'm not scared of the density. What I'm scared is, what is it bringing to the city with the density? What benefited for the overall community and for the city? And because right now, that's a little bit of where my fear is this really bringing something overall, even for their development, that benefits them well enough? And I don't know if there's a good way to word that. And maybe we don't, but.
So other than a larger park, what other amenity would you consider as being?
Well,
Subjective benefits.
yeah,
It's-
yeah, it is, it is.
We're in the subjective.
Well, I mean, there's a very unique, in Ohio, and I think it's Ohio, Cleveland or somewhere, I don't remember, there's a huge indoor mountain biking facility. Well, we have one of the largest mountain biking areas in the county now. And it's gonna be even bigger next year with 70 miles of outdoor trails. That would be very unique, and it's a huge warehouse that just has mountain biking in it. And granted, there's a lot of factors to being able to do things like that, but like something unique that would come to the community. And I know there's so many thoughts and ways to do that, and so it's a tough thing to even ask, but.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
So I was just texting with Wendy a little bit because she's listening, but she can't.
Hey, Wendy, pickleball courts everywhere.
She'll hear you in a couple minutes. So she's a little bit behind us on the discussion.
Give me
but
the golf course, that's the benefit.
She wanted to point out that our level of service in our Parks Master Plan, if they were to follow that versus what they're giving, what required in this MDA. They're required to dedicate 70 more acres than what's required in our level of service now. So that's a pretty significant amount of open space above and beyond. Just, that was something to point out. And there have been some discussions with a park that would pair up. As we started looking at the plan, we don't have any exhibits on this yet or anything, but there's the Hidden Oaks development has, if you remember that exhibit, there was a letter K park. It was the soccer park. It's about 6.5 acres. There's an opportunity to combine another park onto that one and pair them together and get about a 10 to 15 acre park right in that area that would share between both developments. And you'd have access off of 7300 West and some of the other roads. So there's a couple of opportunities there to address kind of what you're saying and a lot of open space to maybe come up with
And I mean, that's the big thing is we want this to become a benefit to the community. And
maybe it's there, we just haven't.
it's
maybe
just not
been
being,
portrayed
it's not
to
being
us.
seen.
Yeah, it's not.
That's
being
the,
portrayed.
that's the trouble.
and
For,
Blake,
for what they're asking for, we can't see the benefit.
And Blake, I've
That's
told
the
Wendy
hard
this,
part.
I'm not, I mean, I always bring up soccer because that's what I work in. That's my,
He really
That's
wants
just-
all baseball fields.
it's not that, I just want something in the, like I said, that's just an example I always use. I'm not set on it being soccer fields or baseball fields or, I'm just something to the community.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. If it's, it could be land set aside for an arts. We need
I'd
an
love,
arts
I'd love
facility out
somebody
here.
for a national
Stuff-
champion rugby team, a rugby field that they practice on regularly. I mean, I'd love for some benefits to go. I mean, it's not going to be hard to provide a huge benefit to the community saying, we're putting bleachers in and this is going to be the rugby practice field and they can play games if they wanted on it even. It's a unique benefit that is just, it's something that makes it a little more special to the community. And right now we're wondering what that is. And that's the part that I wish I wasn't wondering. So.
Thanks, Blake.
That's why I waited till last for that one. But I don't think it's going to go much further.
So I think that a consensus then is that the majority of the planning commission wants that last number 9.
With the.
With the
amendment-
stipulations that
With
he-
the amendment that he made, that, decrease the number or provide
additional benefits.
benefits.
And again, that is
And I think
that's
you
gonna be
say,
subjective.
or be able to show to the community the additional benefits with either programmable space or amenities that could serve the overall community. And I think something like that needs to be added because this is a recommendation. And I think to the city council, if they're able to say, yeah, we can show these 5 different things that will benefit the entire community.
Great.
Then they can say, yeah, the density makes sense. But this is a recommendation from us to them. And I think it'd be a disservice if we didn't say that overall, I think it makes sense to decrease the units. And so, and it sounds like we're split on that one, but yeah.
but-
I don't think the ship is sailed is necessarily the way to look at it because it doesn't change what a recommendation is if it makes sense. It just means it may not change.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
So you gonna make a motion?
I don't know, Jason hasn't told me I get to yet.
Oh, yes. You are able to if none of the other members of the commission object.
Okay, does anybody object? You don't have to.
No, I don't object.
One of you can make the motion if you like. It's gonna follow this pretty much, so.
Only change, it should say master development agreement.
And then there was an amendment in, under 1A, where it's the PC review and staff review. So I left in the commercial and mixed use under both of those, and so it should just be under PC review for the site plans.
Did you catch that, Chris?
I was reading through it to make sure it didn't, yeah.
Under staff review and planning commission review. So the commercial
Okay,
mixed
yeah.
use and multifamily site plans are in both of them. It should only be in PC review.
So
Yeah, under
this
PC review.
should be crossed out.
Yep, there we
Okay,
go.
Look at him
Oh,
draw.
that was pretty slick. Who has the special pin?
This magic finger here.
Just with the finger, huh? That's pretty awesome.
Finger for it.
Okay,
Legal has the special pin, wouldn't you know that?
then the question is, I'll make the motion if no one objects. If somebody else would like it, they can. I'm good either way, but All right, so I'd like to make a motion for item 4.1, which is a request to approve the master development agreement and design standards for the proposed Olympia development at approximately 7051 West, 126 South, 933 acres, and that's a recommendation for approval with additional items on top of what staff may have with, and do you want me to read through them? Okay, with item 1, work with staff to implement more transparent public process than currently provided, including amending the IRC process with the following options. Remove IRC, identify items for PC and staff review. PC review would be subdivision, conditional use for home occupation, commercial mixed use and multifamily site plans. Staff review would involve single family and conditional uses. Item 2, add language to identify unique in the open space in item 6.2.1. Number 3, remove agricultural from approved open space. Item 4, amend open space definition to allow private land as well, because it's applicable to some of the other items. Number 5, reducing the block sizes to promote walkability as proposed by Commissioner Sickle, and or possibly allow larger blocks if transected by pedestrian path, which creates a 400-foot spacing for pedestrians, and consider areas in the village center, community, commercial to require alternate pedestrian path materials, including wider bridge connections. Number 6, adopt language as presented by Commissioner Jackson regarding multifamily and commercial design, including commercial center and cantilevers.
Excluding.
Excluding.
Oh.
You said including, excluding.
Excluding commercial centers and cantilevers on balconies. Number 7, allow increased distance from park to half mile if park is considered large or unique. Number 8, encourage underground parking in multifamily mixed use and commercial areas. Number 9, decrease the number of units allowed in the overall development. And motion made by myself.
Did you want to clarify number 9?
You clarify number 9.
Clarify the last one.
Number 9, decrease the number of units allowed in the overall development, with the recommendation to City Council that the amount of units are appropriate if able to determine that there are aspects to this development that are beneficial to the overall community, which could include larger or connective parks to neighboring developments, and or different unique aspects of it. Is that okay?
Fantastic. I'll second that.
Second by Andy, and we'll call for a vote. Andy?
Yes.
Lauren?
You know, I will say I agree with all these recommendations, but I still, contrary to what legal has said, I don't think it's ready, so I'm going to vote no.
Okay. Daryl?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
That is approved to move on to the City Council with a vote of 4-1. And then going from there, are there any additional comments from the Planning Commission or Chair at this point? Seeing none, we'll move on to 6, which is future meetings. The next meeting will be Wednesday, August 11th, 2021, City Council meeting, and then after that will be Wednesday, August 25th, 2021, City Council meeting. Do we not have a Planning Commission on?
The 19th.
On the 19th, Clint?
Are we meeting on the 18th?
Clint, are we meeting?
Hey, Clint, are we
meeting?
On the 18th?
Oh, no, we are not. Are we meeting on the 18th? I know 19th, that
Not
Thursday.
unless
we
you
are
have
not.
something, we haven't
that's
planned
right.
on it.
Okay.
That's right, you do.
But,
So-
Noonday.
That's
Yeah.
right.
the night,
That's
yeah.
right.
the
I didn't know if we were meeting the day before, so we're not.
You don't need us that
Okay.
day?
Not unless you want to.
We'll take the day off then.
Take it off.
All right. If there's nothing else, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Go to dinner. Didn't you have enough dinner in the candy jar? Couple airheads, you are what you eat.